Good evening. Welcome to the Windsor Unified School District Board Workshop. This is our third version of the budget workshop. We are trying to get some information together and share out some possibilities for saving some money if we don't get full funding and trying to do some cutbacks of some kind. So I'd like to welcome everybody that's on Facebook Live or that's watching on YouTube. And before we get started, just remind you that we don't see your comments. So if you do have a comment you'd like to share, you can post it there, but we may not see it when we're on the Zoom, and we can look back at it later. Or potentially, if you'd like to email Jen Cox, our secretary in the meeting, she may be able to get us a message about that. So at this time, I'd ask Jen to do a roll call of the trustees.
President Heights.
Here.
Vice President Ahmad.
Here. Trustee
Adams.
Here.
Trustee Carnation.
Here.
Trustee Valenzuela.
Here.
Thank you, Jen. As is our tradition, we'd like to do a flag salute, even though we're not all in the same room with a flag behind us. So I'd like to ask Trustee Valenzuela to please lead the salute.
Put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, George. Appreciate your help with that. At this time in our meeting, item 4 is public comment. I received a few different public comments earlier today through our email system. 4 actually. Some of them we'll be talking about later today, so I'm not going to read the full comments, but the board has received them, and if the board members would like copies of all that, I can share it. We have 2 that are concerning they're both from 4th grade teachers at Brooks Elementary. One is Marty Fritz and Sherry Rodriguez have both sent in a note today offering some guidance to us to fully support the librarians and the computer lab technicians and teachers. They feel very strongly that that's something that should not be cut in our budget, and they wanted to share with us that they're fully behind their colleagues in the libraries and the computer rooms. We also received a public comment notice from Terry Oden, one of our PTA representatives for Cali, and he shared with us some assembly bills that are currently active in the government, and they're bills that will be funding public schools and being grants and things that are possible monies coming in for us. So we hope that some of those can be supported. We may get a chance later to share those links and to talk about some of the possibilities of monies coming in from the federal government as well as the state government. And I also received a public comment from Elizabeth Long, and she shared a message with us of not wanting schools to open in the fall unless we are completely safe and have a vaccine and we're sure that no students or teachers or staff will have a chance of getting infected by COVID-19 or the coronavirus. And so she shared her concerns about our opening in the fall. Not a public comment, but just kind of an opening statement regarding opening in the fall. We will have a little report on that later. But I attended a meeting last night with many of the local school board presidents. Lori Fong, who's the president of Santa Rosa City Schools, she reached out to set up a meeting with the local trustee presidents of all the school boards. There are 40 school boards in Sonoma County. I think about 25 of them or so were represented last night. And then also represented were some of our California School Board Association leadership, President Vernon Billy, many of his staff that work on policy and work on support for the schools were there. And so there'll be another meeting probably in the future for this group, maybe sometime later in this month. But we did talk about several things, some of which, just give a few highlights. In the next week or 10 days, we're expecting some guidance from different groups on situations that will kind of guide the reopening in our area of the state. One of those by the California School Board Association. So it would be a statewide situation where they have, checkpoints and lists of what needs to happen before we can safely open. Another by a superintendent's group at the state level, where they're working mostly large districts like Los Angeles or San Diego, Sacramento area, where they have so many more students than we have. And they're putting together some information checklists. And then also next week, there's a meeting with the Sonoma County Office of Education and Dr. Harrington, our county superintendent, where he has put together with a task force of local superintendents, including Dr. Kruger and Jeremy Decker, who will be our incoming superintendent. They're both working with him on policies that will be necessary for Sonoma County to open. A big part of that will come from leadership at the local county health department. A lot of things to consider, how many students could be in a classroom, how many students can ride a bus or can be in the cafeteria. Will everybody be required to wear a mask or protective equipment? What happens with room ventilation and cleaning between classes for students that move from one class to another, or between a morning session and an afternoon session, if that's what's chosen, or an A day, B day, like we have at the high school. The possibility of if there are teachers that are not comfortable coming or not healthy coming back to school, and are we able to get substitutes? There'll be a big shortage of substitutes potentially if we have a lot of teachers who are unable to participate in school or that are concerned about their health. And then that's a union issue as well as a local issue. And something else that was shared was that South Korea schools opened about 2 weeks ago after they had been on hiatus since January. And they just now have reclosed again because they had a spike in cases in their school system. So that's always concerns there and questions there. I've been receiving phone calls and people that see me out in public asking about what we expect to do, and we don't currently have the answers, even though school's only about 11 or 12 weeks away to start in the fall. So there will be a lot more information to follow. I know it's going to be difficult for families to have to wait, but it's also difficult for us to have to wait. We're kind of at the mercy of the health department right now and the Center for Disease Control. So when we get more information, we'll be sure to share that. And we look forward to some robust discussions about opening of schools, whether that can happen in the fall completely, whether it will be a hybrid model, whether it will be online learning only. And we may get an update about that later tonight as well. So with that message being said, are there any other adjustments to the agenda, something that somebody would like to add in that's not on the agenda tonight from the trustees? I hadn't received any notes from anybody. So at this time, we will begin the amended special board meeting, item 6.1, consideration of information and adjustments for the upcoming 2020 and 2021 school year. So I'll hand off to Dr. Kruger and Lois Standring and the district staff to lead us through the discussion.
Okay, thank you. You covered quite a bit of ground there, President Heights. I'll fill in some additional details in a bit, but our intended outcomes for this evening are to go through updates and information, get to a multi-year approach based on some questions and considerations from trustees, as well as we want to, again, have options for budget adjustments, solutions, and impacts based on our discussions. So I'm going to start with updates. I'll start with more legislative updates. Last week, the Senate met and pretty much they rejected a lot of the governor's proposals. But they did come up with some proposals that actually restore funding with federal assistance, including the local control funding formula to be funded so that a 2.31% cost of living adjustment was added back. ADA would be held harmless. School reopening support block grant would be considered or requested so that we could get help with the expenses of reopening school in the fall. And I'll go over some more details about what that might look like, because we've included an assumption in our some of our options this evening. Along with the list of items that were proposed to come back for the governor to consider in a committee that will be meeting, is that if federal funds do not materialize, there will be the proposal to defer money. So what that means is, instead of, just for any public member who has not been tuning in, deferrals mean that instead of cutting the funds, we can count on them, but they won't come later, and they won't come until later the next fiscal year. And one of the analogies I like to use, and I'm dating myself back to my childhood, but I will gladly pay you on Tuesday for a hamburger today, and that's sort of the analogy that's fitting for deferrals. So I'm going to move to response to requests. We received requests for some reports, and so we had gotten, and Lois and Human Resources have put together a staffing, it's a staffing spreadsheet that was requested for trustees to review as a side-by-side to the Seabeds report that Lisa Saxon had distributed several weeks ago. So that has been done and went out this morning. Also, there were some considerations and requests made for us to consider for tonight's presentation, which have been made. But one of the things that also has been requested is to look at what does school look like in the fall. And of course, the answer is we do not know. We have to take our direction from local public health, state public health, and the CDC. So a group of superintendents have begun to meet as President Heights said, to look at options and look more closely at, so what kinds of steps might we consider more clearly as options? And I don't know how clarifying this is, but I think there's more movement in our county towards the options of either opening school with a 6-foot distancing measure, or another option is opening school with 12 to 16 students in a cohort per classroom. And that cohort model would operate where students attended 2 to 4 days a week. And then the third option would be a full class size in a cohort with students wearing masks. Of course, there are a number of specific items that have to be considered regarding safety, temperature taking, cleaning of rooms, transportation, childcare, and a number of other cost items that come with an alternative opening or any of those options. Distance learning and independent study options for high-risk students and family members is being considered. I know that there is a notion that what if we just opened in a distance learning model? And while I think maybe that might be the simplest way, it's also it's not effective for student instruction. So there are a lot of things that we still have to think about, but we went ahead and we included a cost of what it would be like to open, probably with any of the hybrid options of different kinds of operations that we had to provide. And so that is reflected in the 3 scenarios that Lois will be talking us through in a little bit. I'm going to stop. Are there any additional thoughts or questions before we move on to additional input? Okay. Additional inputs. So my budget questions at WUSD.org continued to have more ideas, questions, etc. Lois has incorporated any new ideas that have come in from that source and or general emails regarding the budget or budget considerations. And so she has added that to both the spreadsheet of possible budget adjustments and consideration in her multi-year scenarios. So with that, we'll get to next steps at the end, but with that, I'm going to move to Lois, who will start back with the multi-year projections as it looks right now. And Lois, you're muted. There you
Got
are.
it. I'm not going to go through this again. This is here as a landmark. This is our starting place with what we know right now, both as far as where our budget could possibly end for 1920. That will be a different number. There's no doubt about it. But when this was created 2 weeks ago, this was the best guess as to where we would land with the 8,395,532 moving forward to our beginning balance for 2021. And this reflects a 10% cut in our revenue for the next 3 years. It doesn't compound, it's just the same 10% across the 3 years. And with no changes to our expenditures, we will be fine for next year, 2021, but then 21-22 will be negative from, I just got a hint, so I'll tell you. In case you don't know, when numbers are in parentheses, that means it's negative. So in 2021, our ending fund balance is $3.5 million in a positive light, so that's a good thing. But as we move forward and have less income and without changing expenditures for 2021-22, it goes to a negative 2.4 million and then compounds up even more to the third year out of a negative 9 million. And just to remind people, we are required to do 3 years when we look ahead. That is a state law, and the county uses that information to do oversight and make sure that we're fiscally responsible. Any questions or comments on this slide before we move forward?
If you don't mind, I'd like to chime in a second. This is Eric.
Of course.
So just to refresh and let everybody in the audience know, the exciting news for us is last time we had one of these meetings, there were almost, like 1,700 people that had viewed our meeting. So we've got a lot of watchers out there, and I want to make sure everybody understands the situation. This shows 10% cut next year, and 10% the following year, and 10% the third year. So if the budget cut does not get funded back, each year we'll have a 10% cut on top of what we have this year. And then it also shows that we're keeping our 5% in reserve, even though that the state mandate is 3%, but we've chosen to have 5%. So all those things are in this document, correct?
Well, the 5% is reflected in the ending fund balance. So once we pass 2021, the whole notion of a reserve for economic uncertainty disappears because we have no fund balance. We are
Correct.
negative. So it really is only reflected in the first year.
Yes, thank you for showing that. That makes sense, yes.
Lois, I had a question, and I don't apologize if we've covered this in one of the prior workshops. The 10% cut in revenue, is that passed to us from the state as a 10% reduction in our ADA, or where does that 10%, what's that based on?
It's based on their budget, and it hits in the amount funded per ADA. We get that much less for every unit of ADA. Yes,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome. Anything else on this? Okay, why don't we move forward, Brendan? So what I've done, if you were watching or attended previous workshops, we had fictional scenarios that were meant to be instructive about how the timing of reductions impacts a budget, and that if you load the reductions up front, the same reductions have a compounded effect over the life of this multi-year projection. If you reduce by $1 million the first year, your numbers reflect the benefit of that $1 million in all 3 years without making additional cuts. But if you wait to later in the time frame, you may have to make $2 or $3 million of cuts to get the same effect on your bottom line. What we've done here by request is done some multi-years using the information from the reduction list that we've gone over in previous workshops. I have broken it out in sections so that it's not just one lump. You can see what makes up the different things. If you recall, the reduction sheet had it was a phased approach. And the first section was reductions that were one time, but also things that we had been planning to bring forward well before the financial crisis in the state. They were meant to deal with the deficit and our declining enrollment to try and right our budget so we could move forward with a balanced budget for Windsor, which is something that we have not had regularly for a long time. So that first line that says first section, one time and routine and restricted maintenance, the first section means the things that we would have brought forth for approval, whether or not there was a financial crisis. So that's built in here. The one time is some things that it's using half of the tribe money. It's using the CARES money that's coming through for our district, which at this point is $276,000. And it's also using the carryover from our supplemental that has accumulated over the last several years of about $450,000. So in the first year, that's a $1.9 million reduction to our expenditures. So the 32,319 in that second column under 2021, the first number 33,147 is the revenue we can expect. The 32,319 expenditures is if we continue with our expenditures as they are with some already built-in assumptions that we knew prior to these workshops, including reduction of some FTE already just from attrition, and the reduction of 2 professional development days in the school calendar. So those are all reflected in that number. And then we start talking about further reductions. So those numbers are in parentheses, and that means that expenditure number is reduced. So the first group is the 1966. If you move to the next year, some of the one-time money disappears. The only one-time money that's in that 1,276,000 under 21-22 is the second 500,000 of the tribe money. And you can look over if you, the third year out, that 500,000 disappears altogether. And so the 776 reflects the first section of reductions, and plus the routine and restricted maintenance adjustment we're allowed to make because the state changed some rules of about $45,000. So any questions on that line? I think that might be the most complicated one to just get your heads around what's happening here.
So I know we talked about it in the past, but maybe I'll ask it again just for clarification. Why was it chosen to do half the tribe money in one year and half in another? Because earlier you said that the more we do in the first year, the more it helps later on.
And we could do that. It was just a matter of, I think part of it is the conservatism of, oh, if we got some help, maybe we wouldn't have to use all the tribe money. But that's a choice. There's nothing set in stone about these. These are just examples.
Lois, on the revenue, I'm assuming that you're taking your a certain number of students times the ADA, but what is the in apartments world they call the vacancy factor? What is our absentee factor that we're putting in there? Are we expecting like 93% attendance, 95, 94?
Our attendance hovers between 95 and 96, probably closer to 95.
Okay, so is that basically what that is our enrollment times 95% attendance?
Yes, with as well, it also has to do with what the state is projecting that they will give us per ADA. But yes, that's all part of what flows into that, along with assumptions of declining enrollment.
Right. Yeah, but I guess the part of that equation that I was trying to get to is that we're figuring basically roughly about 95% attendance rate.
Yes.
So if when we talk later about ways to increase revenue and those kind of things, if we could increase that even 1 or 2%, that makes a big difference, doesn't it?
It does. It makes a very big difference.
I'm hoping that the parents that listen to this understand that this is how they can help. So.
And I'll get to Sharon in a second. Maybe she'll have the same point I have. One of the considerations at the state level is what's called a hold harmless account. And so whatever our ADA, and Lisa's nodding her head, she may know about this more than I do even. Whatever ADA we had in October when we did our C-beds of last school year, the state would just pay us for that amount, whether we have exactly that many kids on a blended model or exactly that many kids on a traditional model. We would be funded based on what we had this current school year that just ended, not necessarily the enrollment of kids coming and going because of situations with COVID or job security or whatever else may happen.
Can I clarify that we're paid ADA on attendance? So it's not on the C-beds numbers. It's on, making me dizzy, Brandon. It's on our what's called our P2 report, which we file in March, and it reflects attendance during the school year. So that's whatever we filed in March, which was actually based on a February 29th end of year because of the shutdown. That is what we're being held harmless to, is the ADA that we earned this year. Am I correct, Lisa?
Yeah, that's
so not the October date that I mentioned, but
no.
In February or March, before we went out to extended learning, whatever we had at that point in our schools, that's what we'd be funded at without any hostage holding or any reductions or anything like that.
And how much the students attended, not
True.
just how many students we have.
That is my understanding of the concept currently as well.
Okay, so I move forward. Whoops, no, I'm sorry. Same scenario 1, Brandon. I just need to move down more. The second line I put separate is the furlough days. That's something we've talked a lot about, and it's something that is shared by all employees. That number reflects every employee in the district. For 5, I take that back. It's 5 furlough days for everyone, plus 2 extra for management to be on par with certificated staff who are getting 7 less days if we go with 5 furlough days, because they've already lost the 2 PD days. So that's the 835, and that's straight across the 3 years. And that's a very estimated assumption, because it's clear that people's salaries change year to year, but this is so fluid and we're changing it all the time. There's no real value in making those kinds of adjustments. It's the concept here that counts.
So to the viewers, go ahead, Bill. I'll give you a chance.
We had mentioned before that there is some state approval that is required for that. Is that reducing the school year by 5 days, or could you explain what triggers outside of the control of this Board of Trustees is needed for furlough days?
It is something that will be part of the governor's budget when it passes at the state level in June. And it would be an item, what they call flexibility, that the state offers to school districts as methods to help deal with this budget crisis. So it happened in the past. It happened back in the, as they say, the Great Recession, where they allowed schools to go down to 175 days. And those 5 days become unpaid days for all employees.
Thank
And
you.
of course, is something that needs to be negotiated, but it's the state making that flexibility allowance that lets us even start the conversation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Eric, did you have a comment? Okay. The second section, which you can see is a fairly large number, that is without any consideration of changes that we might make. But as it stands right now, the list of reductions that we had added because of the budget crisis. When we get to the list, you'll be reminded what those are. It reflects some large items, some smaller items. It's predominantly the positions are classified positions, as I explained just last Thursday, and that's because at this point, that is what is available to do. This is an ongoing process, and because classified are focused on in this list does not mean that we will not include certificated in our discussions of how to make reductions, which is what the next line is. There's an assumption that the state, again, we're dependent on the state and allowing us to, once the budget passes, if we hit a certain criteria, which I believe is a reduction in our revenue of 2%, which by far we have reached that, we are allowed to have what are called summer layoffs. And this is in contrast to normally in a school year, we have a layoff period in March through May for certificated staff. So this number, there's no real, I shouldn't say there's no basis for this number, but we have yet to really look at what our options are for reducing certificated staff. We have some ideas, and some ideas that look feasible approach $500,000. So that's why that number got there. I am going to guess that number could be higher, depending on what enrollment looks like, what scheduling looks like. That's a long, important conversation to have. And then Brandon mentioned in opposition to the savings that we're trying to have by reductions, we're going to have some number of unknown costs related to opening school. Again, this number is a best guess at this point. There are school districts spending much more than that. They are bringing in portables, they are creating spaces, they are hiring more staff. In our situation, I can't imagine that will ever be possible. We would be making reductions just to pay for the ability to run a certain program. So as we talk about what's going to happen next year, that is one of the considerations, not just what can we offer to our families and students and not cause the district to go bankrupt at the same time. So the $750,000 reflects that the CARES money, as I mentioned, that we were getting as one-time money of $267,000. We're talking about using that for devices, both for teachers and students, so that people will have appropriate devices to do distance learning, because we're pretty clear that some piece of our program will include work from home, at least for the students, if not some of our teachers. So once you take all these numbers and roll them through the years, and I will say the second section line, the reason That is different from 2021, where it says 1,244,000, and then the next 2 years it's 1,653,000. That's because of the 60-day notice window that we need to allow for our classified employees, and that would happen at the beginning of 2021. So the reduction would not begin until early November. So the bigger number reflects a full year of that reduction. So these numbers flow through the spreadsheet. If you can move it just a little bit down, please, Brandon.
No.
Can we somehow just get the other slide, but get the bottom row to show better?
Let me work on a smaller version, maybe.
Lois,
Maybe
while he's working on that, could I ask a question?
Of course.
So the people I work with and some of my friends will say that I'm usually the pessimist of the group, but I'm going to be the optimist for this issue tonight. If things go great at the state level and our state Senate's able to rally the troops and support and have the governor change his mind and we're funded the same way we were this year, but it doesn't happen until after we pass this budget that's proposed tonight. Most of these things could come right back in and people would keep their jobs, and most of the items wouldn't have to be worried about because we are deficit spending, but we could use the one-time funds or potentially the tribe money to make sure we make ends meet on that third year. Is that kind of correct in saying that if we were funded the same way?
I will be bold and say yes. The first part of what you said is correct, that we have time from when the budget is passed. As I've talked about, we have May 45-day revise in August. We have first interim. As budget information changes, we will definitely change how we're looking at this. But I would strongly, beyond strongly, say one-time money is not the way to fix deficit spending. That is what Windsor has been doing for years, and it needs to stop. It needs to stop so that we're prepared for situations like this and that we know where our money's coming from. We need to live within our means and use one-time money for one-time purposes. And that doesn't mean salaries just to make ends meet at the end of the road. It means to supplement and get things that are extra that we could use, special programs, special equipment, things like that. Okay. Oh, can we just do it from here, Brandon?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the one, yes, this is the one we were talking about. So I just want you to look at the bottom line. These are, I don't know if healthy is the right word to use. These are lots of reductions, let's put it that way. We are beyond our 3% in all 3 years. So I did this as a model of showing full reductions. I have no belief that as the list was presented is exactly how it will be implemented. So there's certainly room on this, in this scenario, to scale back on some things and still have a healthy budget. Any questions on that? Okay, let's go to scenario 2. So this one, I did the same thing on the top with the idea that this is how we're going to deal with our deficit in spite of regardless of the budget issues we have. And certainly the one-time money could be pulled out if we had great luck with the budget. But anyway, that first line is the same. And then we look at the sale of Windsor Creek. I made the assumption that it would be very difficult to sell it by next year. That's something that takes some time. So if we still have the flexibility in the second year, there's a $4.7 million reduction or help to our expenditures. That's a guess at what that's the appraised value. We don't know what the real value will be. I kept the furlough days in there because, again, that's a shared item. And then we have the same reopening expenses. That's not going to change. So you go to the bottom, and again, we're healthy the first 2 years. And then because that 4.7 doesn't carry through the third year out, we don't hit our 3%. So this helps you to see the difference between having ongoing reductions versus the one-time, even though it's a large one-time reduction. But that helps us in our second year.
Can I jump in real quick, Lois? I have a question
Of
about
course.
that. So the reason that it goes down to the 836, though, is partially because the value of Windsor Creek is not in that model.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Yes, the only reductions that are reflected in that year are $1.5 million. So we don't get the value of ongoing reductions.
The question, Lois?
Uh-huh.
And just as a reminder, can you remind us, even though in 22-23 it shows a positive ending fund balance, what's the necessary dollar amount for the reserve?
It depends on our total expenditures, but generally it's about $1.5, $1.8 million, depending on what we spend. It's 3% of our total expenditures, but you can't base it on this expenditure number because this is only unrestricted. And when we figure the 3%, it's on both restricted and unrestricted. And we have quite a large expenditure.
Quick question.
Restricted. Uh-huh.
But we could divide it up over the 2 years, right? We could take 2.35 million in 2021 and 2022, and then the other half in the other years, and that would be our reserve requirements in both years.
No, because when you take the 4.7, well, I'd have to run it, but the bottom line is it's just one-time money, so I can't.
But we could spread it out. My point is we could spread it out like the tribe money over 2 years instead of just 1 year.
But when you take half of that 4.7 away in 21-22, it will greatly reduce your ending fund balance. So the bottom line, and so that will carry forward, and I think it'll end up about the same, if not worse.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And the other point of that one is we don't know how long the flexibility for using the sale of property is going to last, how long they'll allow us to use it for general fund purposes. But one would assume that if they take away the flexibility, that's because things have gotten better on the budget side of things. Anything else on this one? Okay, I have one more scenario.
Maybe I'll add one thing while you're switching screens here. So basically the difference between number 1 and number 2 that you just shared is that we don't have as many staffing cuts, and we don't have as many of the smaller but still important things that we're taking from our budget, like the librarians and the coaching stipends and the.
That is correct. That middle section, section was not reflected in that.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, and we're adding $4.7 million, right?
Correct.
Yeah, but that's the main difference, isn't it? Really?
Well, no, because if you can you go back to scenario 1, please, Brandon?
It's saving people's jobs and programs.
If you look at that middle line, Rich, the second section, additional reductions. 1.2 plus 1.6 plus 1.6. So that's more than 4.7 right there. So the 4.7 is kind of instead of that in that model.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to comment real quickly, and thank you, Lois, for the scenarios. With respect to Windsor Creek, I don't know what we're doing as a board, if we're selling it or we're keeping it. But if that also ties into our discussion with the town, because I think during our town council meeting, they had said in one of the reports that they're looking at renting space or moving employees there. So I just don't want to get in a position where we agree with the town that we're going to allow them to use Windsor Creek. Then at the same time, we decide to sell the school. So we have to be cognizant of what we're going to do and not get ourselves in a corner. But I guess that'll come up later.
I'm sure it will only be sold if after much discussion. Okay, let's go to scenario 3. So this is altogether different. The first line is the same. Again, I will reiterate that group is the assumption to do the basic writing of our budget. The second one was an interesting suggestion that came through mybudgetquestions.com. This is something the state is doing. This is obviously something we would have to negotiate with the union, but it is certainly the ultimate in everyone sharing in the fix, and the majority of jobs not being lost. And we have the same expenses, obviously. And as you can see, this model also gives us what we need on the bottom line, all 3 years. So there were lots and lots of ways to mix and match. I didn't want to go on and on with scenarios. There are so many different ways we could do it, but I tried to pick 3 that were different from each other and that showed what it takes to actually get to where we want to be. And I will also say, as I said last week, we don't have to have the 3rd year out positive for this budget. We have to have it by first interim, but we don't have to make all the decisions right now. But I also
Lois, what is the impact if we don't have the 3rd years not squared away? What does that do anything to our bonds and those kind of things?
It can change our rating. It certainly can.
Makes it more expensive, or
does make
right?
it more expensive, right? And it puts SCO, the Sonoma County Office of Education, on alert, and we have to come up with a fiscal plan to very quickly write our budget and come back with the reserves that are needed. So it's not anything we can get away with for any length of time. It's not a position we really want to put ourselves in.
And Lois, just to clarify, what you began to explain about this particular budget and the allowance of some adjustments up till the 45-day revise.
Yes.
Is there still negative consequences with that scenario?
No, it's not the same. We don't turn in a multi-year at 45-day revise. The only purpose of 45-day revise is to be able to add to the budget any changes based on the governor's budget that was passed on June 15th, because there's no time by the time the governor's budget is passed for us to put it into our budget and get it done and approved by June 30th. So it's an opportunity. And in this scenario, especially if the layoff window is open and we learn more budget information from the state level, it will be a great time to further adjust our budget towards what is real rather than just guessing.
Lois, I just wanted to make a point too for people watching that with the pay reduction for all staff, and I want to make sure I'm correct, that would be just a direct pay cut. That would not mean we were cutting instructional days, correct?
That is correct.
I think that's a plus because then we're not taking education away from the kids, although it's, and we're spreading out the pain, but, it is us that has to take the brunt of it.
Yes.
But at least the kids.
10% is not a small amount to take off your paycheck.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to mention something about that as well. And as a teacher, and I know how difficult it is to make ends meet in Sonoma County on a teacher's salary. But what this also does, in my view, it eliminates those furlough days, so the students get more student contact time. It also saves any of the auxiliary jobs that we've talked about, the librarians, the computer techs, the custodials, the lawn, maintenance people. But it also means that everybody loses 10% right off the top, including the superintendent and the principals and the cafeteria workers. Everybody takes a 10% hit. I made the point earlier of being optimist and pessimist. And this, again, would need to be something negotiated. I can't speak for what the union would say. I'm sure they would not be happy about this. But they would have to decide whether it's helpful to save the jobs of 10 or 20 people, potentially, by everybody taking a little bit of a cut, or if they want to push back and say, find some cuts other places. Do we have time to do that kind of information, working with the unions or working with our bargaining units? Maybe Pete or Brad, if you're there,
I can, a 10% cut would be somewhere around what, $400 to $800 a month for a teacher. A superintendent, with all due respect, makes 5 times as much as a beginning teacher. So the effect of the cuts are lessened the more salary you make. I mean,
No, it's greater.
more money, but it has
It's greater. Oh, you mean as
but it
far
has
as
more practical impact, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So that's a tough one.
I have a question, and this is definitely thinking outside of the box and maybe magical thinking, but if that is a $2.8 million savings, is there, I don't know the laws behind this, but is there a possibility of, looking for grants, doing fundraisers, asking our local wineries or our local businesses for contributions that can go towards that would diminish that number?
certainly, that's a lot of work because it's $2.8 million every year. So
Mhm.
that's really almost $9 million. But yes.
So Lois, in theory, on scenario 3, the 10% pay reduction, which I don't think will happen, but if it did happen, it'd be 10% reduction for 3 years. So the employees would be saying, yeah, we'll take 10% less every year for 3 years coming.
Right.
Is that the rush?
That's how it's set up right now. It can be set any way that we would determine would be helpful, but I just did this as a simple illustration of what could happen.
But any reduction in pay would have to be negotiated. We can't just say
That is correct.
everyone's taking a 10% reduction. Everyone, these different groups, represented and non-represented, would have to agree, right?
Yes.
I think that taking a 10% reduction on like a teacher's salary would be probably pretty devastating to a lot of our teachers. I mean, that's the reality. The reason why I think that idea is interesting is because I see it as something that could potentially be rolled back very easily. Like it's in there for budget purposes, but if there were supplemental funding from the federal government, if the state kind of figured out where they're going to find the rest of the funding for education, then that's something we could easily take out and have very little impact. It's also an incentive to really mobilize people to advocate and to say, hey, our district is having to cut salaries by 10% across the board. That it doesn't even enable us to like live in this community. Like I think it's a rallying point. So I see the value in including it for the purpose of not actually making the cut in the long run. The risk would be people don't mobilize, the economy gets worse, and it ends up taking effect. Then again, on the other hand, if it's that bad, then I think that maybe having a job in a climate where so many people have lost a job, having a job that pays a little bit less might not be the worst thing. The cost of living may go down. So that is all something to consider. But I do think the idea is interesting from the budgeting perspective, because you could proportionately roll it back if funding were increased, and you could do that really easily.
Yeah, I agree, and completely, Stephanie, 100%. And if you look at scenario, I think it was 1 or 2, where you see the furlough days and then the additional certificated layoffs or reductions, I'm thinking, like, where are we going to cut more? It almost makes me, well, it does, it makes me heartsick, but I just don't know how we can continue as educators to do the job with less and less and less people and the expectations rising. I think in each scenario we're taking a hit. It's just how that hit is leveled out that makes a difference.
Thanks, Sharon. I am interested in hearing from the other board members too, because I haven't heard your thoughts yet. Rich and Bill?
Thanks, Stephanie. I was trying to be quiet. All right, so
Sorry.
yeah, I appreciate you shifting that bullseye. By the way, first off, I want to say, hey, Lois, thank you. I know what I don't want to say terrible job. I don't mean it that way. What a onerous task this is to put all these different things together and try and figure out how to make things work and give different scenarios of different things. One of the things that I kind of want to do is I want to go over numbers that we can agree on. And hopefully we can agree on them, or maybe we can't agree on them, but they're just kind of numbers. And I just wanted to go over our enrollment of where it was and our staffing at our highest point and now. So for example, I took Maddie Washburn, Windsor Creek, and Brooks. I put all 3 of those together because they're now just 2 schools. So I took the 3, consolidated those into 2. In 2014-15, I'm sorry, 13-14, that was our highest enrollment as a district, roughly. And so for those 3 schools, we had a total enrollment of 1,555 students. And now in this year, we have 1,084. That's a 30% reduction in students between those 3 campuses, now divided between 2 campuses as sites. When you look at the actual staffing numbers for that, we had 3 administrator or management numbers, and now we're down to 2. That's obvious, which is why they closed, Windsor Creek to try and save some of those costs.
Rich, I don't mean to cut you off. Are you considering that 1 year was Cali though, was rolled into that? We got to report back later that highest year included Cali in the elementary school numbers.
No, I'm looking at the thing that Lois sent us that has all the different schools, their enrollment and their management. I'm sorry, I took the CBEDs that Lisa gave us for the enrollment numbers, and then I took the historical staffing numbers, and I'm kind of putting the 2 numbers together, just so that way we kind of have something to compare, so we can look at.
I just wanted to make sure we weren't crossing over with a different report that you got at SCO earlier.
No.
Sorry
to Windsor. And this is why I'm bringing it up, because my numbers, not my numbers, but if I calculated something incorrectly, I'm the first to say, hey, we made a mistake or something's wrong. It's just that I think we need to understand really where we are in the staffing area, because that's really where 80 or so % of where our money goes is in the staffing. So I just want to make sure that we're all having the same stuff, the same information, and we're aware of it, even for the people that are at home watching. So our elementary, TK through 5, we've had a 30% reduction from our high point to where we are today. Our staffing levels in between those 2 schools now, we went from 75 certificated employees to now we're at 61. So we did go down, and I didn't calculate out. Oh, we did. So the certificated employees, we went down 19%. And then the classified employees, we actually went up. So in that same period of time, So on the certificated, we went from 75 to 61, a 19% reduction. And in our classified, we went from 93 employees to 101, an 8% increase. So while we went, and this is just the numbers I've got. So we went, our ADA went down 30%, but our classifieds increased 8%, and our certificated reduced 19. And for the Cali, in the same time period, we had a 12% increase in our enrollment, but we had a 28% increase in our certificated employees, and we had a 40% increase in our classified. So Cali went up in our enrollment, and our certificated and classified also went up, but they went up at a greater rate. Windsor Middle School, we've had a 14% reduction from our high point of our high point of 944 students. Now we're at 812, and we're estimated to be at 600 in 2 more years, which is, before I forget, I'm thinking that in our next couple years down the road, we got to remember, and I forget, that we need to factor in that the middle school is taking a couple hundred kids less in that regard. Windsor High School, but Windsor Middle School was a 14% reduction in that time period. They had a 9% increase in certificated, and they had 11% increase in classified. Windsor High School had just a small decrease from 1,691 to 1,659. If you look at that 5-year average, they're averaging right around 1,700. The year before, we had more. But even at the high school, let's just call it that their ADA was flatline. Rough and dirty, they had a 22% increase in certificated employees and a 16% increase in classified. Their management was 4 at the height then, and they're 4 now, which is consistent pretty much across the board. And those are the big, I could have went into the other couple schools as well, but those are just the big broad brush numbers of what has been presented to us as information. It doesn't mean, hold on. I'm just letting you know that this is just what the these are the hard numbers of our enrollment and our when comparing our height of our enrollment a few years back to where we are today. So when I'm looking at this, we actually have 2 issues. One, we have a reduction in our budgets coming for 2 reasons. One is because the state's not paying us as much per kid, but we also don't have as many kids either. So these are just numbers. I'm hoping that we can start to put our minds around these things as well as everything else, and just because a lot of times we feel things are a certain way, but then when you actually look at the data, they're not necessarily how you feel. And so, and I'm not making any judgments on any of this information either. I'm just putting it all out there for everybody, because not everybody got this paperwork. So, because, Lois is working her fingers to the bone, and so is the rest of the staff too. I don't mean to exclude anybody. Everybody is answering questions that all board members have and all parents have, and everybody's interested and everybody is concerned. So we all have them, but they still only have 24 hours in the day to generate it. And so I do appreciate Lois giving us the information that we're asking for and giving it to us in a way that's pretty easily understood and followed through. And the same with Lisa giving us the other enrollment information. So that's pretty much my just kind of some thoughts for right now, and we can go from there.
I have just a point on that data. Thank you for presenting that. But I think it's a little misleading, because if you look at the original data, you would, in order to be able to compare these jumps in percentages, you would have to have the student to employee ratios in question as well, or in comparison as well. So whereas, and I'm not just saying it for Cali, but whereas Cali, went up substantially and another school didn't, it may not be apples to apples comparison. So I just think we have to be really careful with the numbers and make sure that what we're comparing is the same across the board.
I agree. And Stephanie, I'm going to ask you to help me make sure that I'm saying this correctly, but the whole thing that even made me start looking at this or thinking this, Sharon, was when we went to a master's in governance class and they were showing the different school districts and stuff. And Stephanie caught a mistake in one of their charts, but I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that in our height of our enrollment, we were at about 23 students per teacher, I think, or there was 23 per employee. There was something, and then we were at 19 at the height of our enrollment. We were at 19, and now we're at 23. So there's an increase of something. Now, all that said, Lois told us in these numbers, there's some things that aren't 100%. They could be not in the right category or something. So when I say certificated or classified, that those numbers may not be hard and fast. There might be somebody. I mean, Lois, you could tell us.
Yeah. And I'll quickly jump in, Rich, because you asked me to clarify. So I think it actually started where the ratio was one employee for every 23 students, kind of at the height of enrollment. And granted, that was coming out of the recession, but then it as we declined in enrollment, we now have a ratio of 19 students for every employee. So we haven't kept pace with that. And I don't know if that's because pre-recession, there's a really weird feedback I'm getting. Sorry.
Oh, it might be me. Hold on.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it was. Okay. I didn't mean to call you out at all. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was my headphones. So I think that, I don't know if the pre-recession ratios were maybe fewer students to staff, and then it kind of went up during the recession, then went back down. But we've definitely the ratios have not held steady. So we've been declining more than we've in kids, it seems, than we have in staff. And I will let Lois explain this better. And Brad is waving.
Yeah, Brad can go next, and then we'll let Lois explain a little more.
Those numbers came through school services with what's called a J90. It's a report that we fill out every year. And I will tell you the accuracy of the J90 depends on who's filling it out. So there is no guarantee that the numbers were given correctly. It's a bear of a thing to fill out. And who knows in the district office over the years who's been doing it. But I would also say, similar to what Rich was referring to with our staffing, you so have to dig in and look at what it really is representing. When you talk about the ratios of kids to employees, my first take on that number is, of course, our special ed numbers have skyrocketed, and special ed classes are so much smaller than regular ed classes. So that's going to take that number down. So that's just one thing that would need to be looked at. Clearly, when you see a pattern, you have to figure out what's causing it, because that's going to give you the information you need to know if you're running your district effectively. That's why school services puts those numbers out, to bring up the questions and to get people to investigate. So hopefully we have time to look into these things and figure out exactly what it is. And I'd love to be able to give you that report with detail of, this is how many classroom certificated it is versus special type certificated people that, are support people to the regular classroom teachers. So there's all kinds of varieties that make a difference in those numbers. You can't make assumptions just from the simple general numbers. Well, I think the best use of those is to get you to ask questions so we look at it more. I can't believe I just said that. Give us more questions. That isn't what I meant.
You slipped, Lois. Hey,
Brad?
Brad, if you don't mind, just 1 second, real quick, Eric. The reason why I even brought the thing up about the percentage of the employees and teachers is because when we looked at it, almost all the other school districts were their numbers were pretty small. It was, I don't even remember what they were. They were 2, 3, 4. There wasn't much difference between, I'm going to say, 10 or 15 school districts, but the numbers for the Windsor district, they just jumped out at you. And that's kind of what caught my eye, and I think it caught Stephanie's eye too, is that it was just so much different than a majority of the other districts. And that's why we
Yeah, no, I get it. And that would tell me, look into it, figure out what the deal is. Why is it like that?
Yeah, it's just information. We're not passing judgment. We're just saying, hey, here's the stuff that's in front of us, and we can dig more or not.
Rich, real
Sorry, Brad,
quickly,
thanks.
'cause I know somebody else is going to speak. When you look at the chart that Lois sent, it talks about Windsor High School being with 4 administrators. That's because the principal at Windsor High School used to be the boss or the supervisor for Windsor Oaks. That's why it was 4, 4, 4. Then it drops to 3. And then if you look at Windsor Oaks, Susan Nystrom became a principal. So then it was 3, 3 at Windsor Oaks, and it goes back to 4 at Windsor High because we added an AP, which would be Mr. Sullivan. So it's kind of tricky looking at the numbers, but thank you for the report.
Okay, Brad, you've been very patient. We'd like to hear what your take on all this is.
Well, first, I want to thank Lois for all the hard work she's done. This is great information. I like the way you laid it out. Rich, I want to thank you for extrapolating what you extrapolated, but I have to clarify it from a classified standpoint. The work is always the same. The number of rooms, the number of food, I mean, all of that stuff never changes. And we took the biggest hits back in 2008. And the district has done a wonderful job of trying to make us whole by bringing back the biggest needs first, such as paraeducators for special services. We've worked hard for bus drivers, et cetera. We've still never gotten back to where we should be with custodians. But the number of classrooms has increased at a lot of our sites. So the challenge I have when we do cuts to classified is a lot of times the work has not gone away. You're just spreading it amongst less people. So there's more work for the same amount of pay because we're all in the same situation. And I'm not blaming anybody. This is not anybody's fault. However, when we talk about equal cuts, that's what we got to look at, equal cuts. And one of the things that I question about the 10% salary reduction, on the same mybudgets.com estimate of savings, at the very bottom, there was a reduction of 7.5% in administrative salaries. So if you add that into the $2,822,000, it's almost $3 million. No, it is $3 million. So I'm sure that's not part of one of the scenarios which we're looking at right now, the $2,822,000. And I could be wrong, but I'm just looking at the suggestions that came in from my budget questions.
But Brad, that would be a 17.5% reduction for management, which probably some would support, but we were trying to be the same amount for everyone. So that was just a different idea that just focused on management.
Understand.
But Brad, were you saying that the 10% cut did not include management?
Not according to the ideas from mybudgetquestions.com with estimated savings.
The way I'm reading it, it does. It includes all employees in the district. Is that right, Lois?
Yes, maybe we should move to that list. Why don't we start to clarify that list from mybudgetquestions.com? That might be helpful if people are ready to move to that.
I think we also need to hear from Trustee Adams.
Okay.
Eric, should I go? Okay, thank you. I do have some more questions, Lois, and I was waiting for you to get into scenario 3, so maybe we could leave that up while I talk. I do not think the 2.8 million budget savings to get to Principal Ferrer's question does in fact include all the employees in the district. And let me tell you how I get there, and I want to make sure, sort of question by question, Lois, that you debunk me if I misunderstand this. At the beginning, I asked you if the 10% cut was based on ADA, and you said it was. As I look at the scenario number, 39 million down to 33.1 is about a $6.5 million cut. 10% of that would be 3.9 million. So what we have is in the general fund, the unrestricted fund, 100% of these cuts. There's no cuts against the $10 million budget in Cali. There's no cuts against the $17 million restricted fund. All $6.5 million is in the general fund, which is unrestricted. Is that where that ended up? You're muted. You muted? You're still muted.
We can't hear you, Lois.
Got it. Sorry. The reduction, the state reductions, that's all unrestricted money. That's what's being reduced. Our restricted money comes in for special purposes and is a separate pot. Cali has its own budget. They will have to, whatever we do that are global cuts will hit Cali. We need to do that. That's part of the contract and part of being a district as a whole. But they have their own budget that we need to look at and make sure they're whole.
Okay. So I'm sorry, if the revenue was 10%, I know it's more than 10% because we have some declining in revenue, but this is like 1.66%. It's 1 2/3. It goes from 39 million.
Well,
right?
and we talked about that way back.
All
Remember,
right.
there was some special one-time revenue this year.
Okay. All right.
So of about $2.5 million. So that's
So let me get to my point to Principal Ferrer's comment. As I look in the multi-year projection that you had us looking at the other day, the unrestricted, classified, and certificated salaries were about $28 million. Again, when you say across the board, it has to be even. As I look at the classified and certificated salaries, if we include Cali and we include the restricted budget, that's more like $41 million. So that
right. But go ahead. I'll wait.
Okay, good. So if it was 10% across the board for every one of our staff, even though it's in certificate in restricted budgets or at Cali, if we're going across the board, we go across the board. So a 10% cut produces 4.1 million. If it's 2.8 million we want, that's a 6.8% cut. So I'm wondering because that's different than restricted money coming in separately or Cali money. If we're doing across the board balancing, we are. If we're not, I think we need to be clear that we're not. And as I look at scenario 3, it does not appear that we are. It appears that we're targeting $28 million of general fund certificated and classified and probably management and admin salaries, but not everybody in the district. There's $13 million in salaries that aren't included in that. I just want to make sure if I misunderstood that or.
So what you did not misunderstand it, okay. But yes, you did misunderstand it.
Okay, that's why I asked.
So if you recall, when you get your first interim, second interim, you have 2 sets of reports. There's the restricted and there's the unrestricted. Right. This is only a reflection, what you're looking at now is a reflection of unrestricted. Right. When we do the actual budgets, that 10% pay, if we were to do it, would also hit the restricted side. It would be all those salaries show up on the restricted financial statements. The 10% cut would be there. When you added it together, it would be whatever you probably close to what you said, over $4 million.
Okay.
But those are cuts that hit restricted revenues. It's apart from the discussion of trying to fix our problem. That restricted, except for special ed, it's self-correcting. You get so much revenue, you can't spend more than the revenue you get. And some of them they are reducing, some of them they aren't. But if they reduce the revenue, we'll have to reduce how we spend it. And the 10% cut would be part of that. But very clearly, everyone in the district would get the 10% cut. Food service is a separate fund. Doesn't show here, but they would get the 10% cut also.
And I'm not advocating that that's the best idea. It's maybe an idea, and I'd be interested, maybe not today, but by the time we meet next week to hear back from our unions, if we were looking at that kind of number of $2 or $3 million, would they prefer furloughs? Would they prefer across the board cuts? Would they prefer some hybrid? That would be helpful for us to know. one point I want to make is on those transfers and sources, all right? Restricted money is not all restricted money. That 5.6 negative is actually $7.7 million that is contributed from the general fund every year to restricted, offset by about $2 million, which is what Cali pays for the general district services. That $7.7 million we send to restricted budgets every year is 23% of our general fund. It's massive. And I'd like us to look, I know I've asked this question and never really gotten an answer because I know it's very close to home, and I absolutely do not want to be an advocate to say, well, let's cut our special education programs, which are very good. That's why a number of people come to this district. But we need to also recognize that in that negative 5.6 million is a $7.7 million siphon every year going over to restricted. And I think that merits some looking at. I'll just leave it at that. And that would be, that would be another set of staff circumstances on what that's paying for. But when we say it's restricted money and it's a separate pot of money, it is, except for 23% of our general fund money goes over there too.
That is correct.
Thank you for explaining the thing about the salaries. I didn't understand where all this was coming from, and thank you. That's all the comments I have for now.
Are we ready to go to the list, Brent? Are we ready to go to the list?
Well, before we get there, I'd like maybe President Heights to have a little discussion of what it is we're doing now. Are we running down a shopping list? Are we sorting out the list? Are we going to give some priority and program discussion from the board members? How are we going to proceed? Because I think there are some opinions people may have or not have about what to highlight. There may be some where we say, great, that's a no-brainer, include that. And there may be others where we need to put them in a parking lot to talk about them. So maybe we could have a minute or two before we actually get to the list to talk with the trustees about how we're going to do this.
Am I muted? No. Can I just add, there are some additions to the list because of the request last week to include items from the mybudgetquestions.com and other things that have been submitted. So I just want to make it clear there's additional items to the list besides what you've seen before.
And this list would only be applicable in scenario 1 and 2. This was not in scenario 3, correct?
Oh, it isn't scenario 3.
Yes. And again, I hope that you don't take the scenarios as, set in stone. They are there as examples, and they're very flexible and workable.
So what I'm most concerned about, I'm most concerned about having enough money. But what I also have a concern about is making sure that Lois has time to get this report done. And I know that we need to approve a report on June 16th, which is 14 days from now. And she's not in her office all the time, and her staff's not in the office all the time. And this isn't just plugging a couple numbers in. This is a major report, and I'm sure she could testify a little bit to how much time and energy that will take. We do need to make some decisions tonight, and that's not going to be an easy thing to do, but she needs to get started on it. Whether we can have another meeting coming up in between now and the 16th, that's another option. But I think maybe Lois could answer some more, but Stephanie also had her hand up, that we do need to start making some priorities, at least tonight, to allow Lois to begin her process.
Right. So I called this meeting. So I thought I would at least take on the task of, giving some concrete suggestions for how we can manage our time. We have about an hour left. So something that I think is helpful is sometimes it's easiest to start with the easy things. So maybe we split it into 3 parts, 20 minutes each. First part is cuts that are easy to make, things that we all agree are just kind of right sizing. And, we could maybe get through that pretty quickly. The second area would be to talk about kind of some of the more structural furlough days or salary reduction ideas and giving direction to our unions on what we want to see discussed. And then the third area would be more of the difficult cuts and also talking about some policy and creative ideas. because I think there are more things we can do than even have been listed. I know I've heard some interesting ideas recently, so I'd like to see us spend some of our time on that once we get through kind of the housekeeping of what can we figure out right now. That's my suggestion, but I'm open to all of the other board members' suggestions.
I think it's great. The only thing I'd like to add to that is maybe we should all as a board have a very quick, brief, I don't even know how to do that, discussion about the sale of Windsor Creek. Because if the sale of Windsor Creek is basically the second scenario that makes the second scenario even kind of semi-float. And so I was a farm kid growing up, and I believe that selling Windsor Creek site at $4.7 million is throwing away our district's seed corn for many, many years down the road at a very low price. And so I don't see the second scenario with the Windsor Creek sale as something that really is, well, actually, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So do we want to have that little discussion about Windsor Creek first or somewhere in there, Stephanie, or the rest of the board? Because that's where the second scenario kind of maybe lives or definitely dies if the Windsor Creek sale isn't in it or it isn't utilized or taken or optioned out. I mean, there are things that we could do with that site. We might be able to sell it to a developer with certain holdbacks where the town can use it for a few years. That's why he's getting it. Whoever the developer is getting it at a lower price with certain other things they might be able to do or guarantees about zoning. But there's a bit of a discussion that needs to be made on that issue alone. So that's why I don't see scenario number 2 probably tonight as even something we could get too far in, but I'm open to everybody's thought on that issue or how we fit that in.
I mean, I'm fine having this discussion right now, and I think we can probably have it potentially pretty quickly if we each say if we're open to selling, and then we know if we want to have that discussion.
So I'll go. I am not open to selling. I agree without the country fiddle music that Richard Carnation wove into his story. Thank you, Richard. A couple of reasons. I think it's a one-time infusion. I believe there is future use and greater value in the future. Fact of the matter, folks, is we got to do that, and we got to cut another several $1 million in that scenario anyway. So I would not support consideration of scenario 2 in a sale of Windsor Creek with what we know now. If things dramatically change and we desperately need a fire sale infusion of nearly $5 million, we may know that in 6 months or a year. Maybe a little bit more pragmatic or pessimistic. I think hopefully things will turn a little bit, but at the end of the day, a fire sale on that property for one-time infusion of money that still leaves us several $1 million short doesn't make any sense to me.
I'll go quickly because I don't agree with selling either. So that's a 3. I think it's a really, really valuable, potentially valuable piece of property. And I just don't believe in selling low. I believe in selling high. I don't think it would be good at this time to make that decision. I agree with Trustee Adams on potentially if the situation becomes dire in the future, then considering it, but I'm not for it now. And I don't know if the other trustees want to comment.
I think we should do what we can tonight and make a parking lot list of what we can possibly cut in the future. And I think Windsor Creek could be like a future cut, as well as the other considerations like North Bay Met, reducing administrators at the sites. Those are things that we can't do tonight, but they could be on a parking lot. Maybe, Eric, my suggestion would be on the first page of the budget cuts that I'm looking at for $693,380. It's the first 10 or 12 items. Maybe we could talk about that as a block, and we could go from there. But we got to start somewhere, and we're going to run out of time. In terms of the first block, since I mentioned it, even though these are cuts that we don't want to make, I'm in favor of these cuts, and I'm willing to make a motion to make those proposed cuts for $693,380. But I don't know if there is opposition by board members to any of those items.
I thought we were going to go down each one, George.
Whatever you guys want to do. I'm just suggesting that.
For this category, I think I'm okay with all of them, but I'm, again, amenable to the rest of the board.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to approve the first set of cuts for that first block, which is 693,380. And then if it gets a second, then we could discuss it.
Can we have somebody roll that up a little?
Yeah.
On my laptop, I can't see some of the things below number 16. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, I'm about to get seasick. So is it just, does it start at garden support and go down to groundskeeper? That's the 693?
It says moving additional positions into supplemental funding, then it goes down to groundskeeper.
Yeah,
Good, just keep it right there. Yeah, freeze.
Yeah, that's the block I'm talking about.
Okay.
So that's my motion. Is there a second?
I'll second for discussion.
Okay. All right, so I guess we could ask our questions, Rich or Stephanie or whomever has a question about one of these
So
items.
I have a question for Brad. So think about it, Brad, while I'm talking. I have not heard any pushback other than these are, appears to me, other than the AXA memberships, virtually entirely classified positions. But I have not heard pushback from the administrators of any of the schools where these might be in effect. And I wonder, Brad, if you could talk to us about these a little bit, other than, you know, understanding as a threshold matter that it breaks our heart that we need to have to start to think about tightening our belt this way. If you have any insight you'd like us to think about in evaluating any or all of these reductions.
Sure, Bill. The groundskeeper was new. That was not on the previous proposal. And yeah, we just went up to 4 groundskeepers a couple of years ago after having one for almost, and Lois, you can correct me, I think it was almost 4 years. We only had one groundskeeper for the entire district. And they pulled custodians in when Dan Wells was here to help us weed whack the high school to make it presentable to open for the school year. So that's an issue. Volunteer coordinators, I know that'll affect Brooks hugely. I don't know if Callie's in part of this number, but Callie, our volunteer coordinator there, is just incredible with getting information and communication out to all parents, both English and Spanish. Account clerks, I mean, most of the time I hear people don't have time to get done what they're supposed to do anyway, and removing additional clerks, where's the work fall to? Again, it's just adding more work to the existing staff. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Brad.
And we have received, it's been a week or two ago, but we have received some information from school staff at schools or principals that they really would like to have those account clerks and those volunteer coordinators. I think they understand that's a little bit of a luxury that not every school has, or that they've been accustomed to having for years now. I'm sure it would be difficult to get all those jobs done with the people on site, but this is, you know, those are some of the extras that if we are fortunate enough to get some good funding later in the year, or if we are able to get some, you know, potential, you know, support donations from the community, those are some things that could be added back in on a one-to-one basis based on what we think are the biggest needs. But this is a good place to start. I think it is affecting the students, but not as directly as other cuts could be.
So I want to comment quickly just to clarify, Eric, because the way this is labeled in the spreadsheet is to deal with declining enrollment and deficit spending. So these are cuts that I think we were going to make kind of systematically regardless of the current budget situation. So I don't know that the plan is to build these positions back in. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that, because I think that we should be really transparent about how, if we're going to make the cut, that we're very clear that this is a reduction that is going to be probably permanent.
That was my understanding when Lois was briefing this. If you recall, even last fall, we were trying to figure out, facing a several $1 million deficit before COVID, where there was going to be cuts in the magnitude of $1 million or more. So, Lois, could you just remind us again if Stephanie's comment is accurate?
Yes, yes, that is how this spreadsheet was laid out, and that is the intention.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, thank you for the correction. I didn't kind of connect the dots there, but as mentioned earlier, if somebody in the community wants to, donate funds to hire volunteer coordinators, we definitely would accept that kind of an offer. But yes, these are things that we had talked about before, and I kind of missed on that one. So thank you for correcting me. So do we have a consensus then that we can agree to look at this list as something we are ready to move forward with?
Yes.
So we have a first motion by Trustee Valenzuela. The second motion was by Trustee Adams, correct?
Yes.
All those in favor of making the cuts listed at $693,380 in this upcoming year and then moving forward into the next year, please say aye.
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 Well, not in favor, I will vote yes.
Any opposed? All right, so we are looking like we can include that in the budget you'll work on coming forward, Lois.
So I'll make the next motion. The next one was the one-time funding that Lois had talked about. It has a much bigger number in the upcoming school year starting in August of 1.227. That's the rollover, carryover, the CARES funding of a little more than $250,000. I initially had some reservation, without a pun intended, of splitting the Lytton Tribe's $1 million, but I think, that was given for facilities, and I think we've kept it for a long time. It seems to me that may be some good use of bridge funding here. So I will make the motion that we consider that as offered. That's 1.227 in the 2021 year, and then those two one-time payments go away, and the second half, or 500,000, is all that continues from that category in 21-22.
I'll second.
Discussion.
Discussion, please. Yeah.
I have a quick question. I think this was already talked about, but why did we decide to split it between 2 years? I think this was already discussed, but I just want to make sure that I understand why we wouldn't do it all the first year to have the maximum impact.
Question.
Well, one-time money, doing it all the first year doesn't give you maximum impact. The maximum impact from first year is when it carries from year to year. So I think the choice in splitting it is to maybe, hopefully, if we get good news, be able to save the second half.
So Lois, this question, if we were to lower our reserves from 5 to 3, how much actual dollars would that be? Rough and dirty. About 800 grand. Is it about 800 grand?
Yeah.
So
One
just
time.
as a thought, and only because, I'm trying to remember, I don't remember who the person was, but someone wrote us a letter and they said, look, if now is not the time that we are in an emergency or a real tough, bad situation, when do we normally use our reserves? And so I just kind of want to throw this out as a question. Would it be better for us to lower our reserves from 5 to 3? It's just a question. Lower from 5 to 3 and keep that $500,000 from the tribe, put that over into the second year to help us in that year going forward, especially with Lois's answer of just talking about how that amount of money doesn't kind of get us. I actually had the same question as Stephanie is, why don't we take that first? But it doesn't sound like it makes a compounding a difference.
As my mother would say, 6 of one, half a dozen of another. It really doesn't matter. We could take the full $1 million the first year, and the impact wouldn't be any different than splitting it between the 2 years, other than the reserves would kind of be a little more balanced. We have a $4.5 million hole next year. These, although they're much appreciated and we can put them towards that hole. Obviously, they aren't going to hit that hole. Our reserves will be what will take us through. So that's happening automatically, Rich.
Gotcha.
When our expenditures outweigh our revenues, the reserves are what take us through.
Gotcha. So if somebody asks us down the road, why aren't you using your reserves? We actually are using our reserves.
Yes.
We're just using them in the second year. Would that
Well,
be accurate?
we're using them in the first year to make sure we stay solvent and make sure we have cash. I mean, the cash is a huge issue right now.
Can you go back to scenario 1, Brandon? Just show that, because I think that's an important point to show. We didn't really talk about that. If we could. So go back to 1. That's kind of the one we're okay. So
Thanks.
we're talking at like the 1.9. We haven't gotten the furloughs and down, but we make whatever those total parentheses up top add up to. That 4 plus, you can probably do it in your head, Lois. And we still have down under net decrease, we still have $1 million of our reserve that we're spending. In year 2021, we spend another 1.7, even with these serious cuts in the second year. And we have to spend $3.5 million the third year. So we have burned through $6 or $7 million of reserves between year 1 and year 3.
Gotcha.
I think that's a great point. That if we didn't do cuts, we just wouldn't have any reserves at all at the end of next year.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Good-
the way
good
I read
point.
the way I read the reserve situation, and I've kind of bounced this back and forth in my head. We have a new item that's in this list called opening expenses or reopening expenses. That's what we need to save our reserves for. We don't know what that's going to cost. It's listed here at $750,000, but depending on how we open, or if we open and then close and then open again, or whatever happens down the line, that's our little buffer, in my opinion, is using our reserves in that account. And it comes from one pocket or the other. You know, it's like a savings account, but it's still on our bottom line in the budget. But I would rather not say reduce it no matter what. I would say use it for things like reopening expenses. If we get funded for reopening expenses, we can use our reserves for something else. But when people ask me in the future, I'd like to say, well, that's what we used because we got in a really desperate situation. We wanted to reopen the schools and it cost us a big chunk of money. So we used our reserves for that.
No, that this is all good. And that's why I brought it up, just because I know somebody took the time to write us and ask us that. So they should be, I feel very comfortable in an uncomfortable situation that we're being prudent and doing the right things here.
I just wanted to add real quickly, I was on the board 6-7 years ago when we got the $1 million from the Linton tribe, and we tried to protect that money for years. Every year it was always on possibility of using. We tried to save it because we figured once those students moved into Windsor, once the homes were built, I think it's like 140 students, we'd be able to use the money for the school sites they were going to or for some sort of program. So I've always been opposed to using that tribe money, but we're in dire circumstances. So with that, I'm in favor of this motion of using that tribe money, because you got to keep the district afloat and we got to make difficult cuts. And even if these 2 cuts pass tonight, that's only almost $2 million, and we have a lot more to go. So I just wanted to be on record that it was something that we saved for many years, but I think it's something that we need to use to save jobs and save programs.
So we were moving down this list. We talked about Stephanie's proposal. I liked it, of having 20 minutes of each section. So let's keep that thing rolling if we can. We're doing well so far. We have a proposal by Trustee
Can we vote on this
Adams.
one, Eric, since we had a motion and a second?
Yeah, I was just going to remind everybody of the motion by Bill Adams, seconded by Trustee Valenzuela. All those in favor of using the one-time funding at 1.2 million and change this year and an additional 500,000 next year, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? So we again pass 5-0 or an approval of using that money. Thank you. Shall we scroll down the list further to see if we're on pace to touch the rest of this page?
And I think we are getting closer, Eric, to the gray area items. So I think this is probably could be part of our next 20-minute segment too.
Yes.
So I just want to I think we're on time. So
Good. I didn't want to forget and then get sidetracked and spend a lot of time on one area and miss the others.
So
Thank you
if I might, Eric, before we go, because Stephanie had framed this one as sort of the structural, the furloughs and the salary cuts in a conversation with the union, and there's some of that in this part of the list. And I'd like to sort of start, if we might, and I know we're not negotiating on the television, but we're trying to figure out a solution to try and get a sense from Brad and Pete to help us understand if it was furloughs or salary cuts or layoffs to right size, if that's, I know that's not sometimes a popular word, or some combination thereof. How can our union leaders help us determine, as the spokespeople for our staff, which of those or what combination would be, preferred is not the right word, would either be the most workable or most sustainable, or however they would like to approach it. If we could maybe hear from them on that, because I think, to me, that's very important when we're looking. I'm looking at scenario one, and the next line was furlough days. But to the extent, fellas, that you can share with us a little bit, there sort of seems to me sort of three approaches to our staff costs, which are the biggest one. Again, furloughs, if that flexibility is offered, salary cuts, which would have to be negotiated for some probably goal amount, or classified and certificated layoffs. Do you have a feeling one way or the other that you can help us understand?
I can start. It's difficult because we have a practical problem of voting on any changes to the contract. We can't get together and vote the way that we normally do. We're in the process of trying to change over to an online voting, but we haven't quite gotten all the technical stuff needed to do that to make sure everybody has a voice. So I'm thinking some sort of combination would probably be the easiest to deal with. A combination of maybe layoffs and some sort of furlough or salary cut. I think it comes down to a lot of different feelings. Furloughs where we don't get paid but we still teach is best for students. But we have people who don't want to work for free, as most of us don't want to work for free, right? So there is that issue. We don't even have a negotiation session scheduled until June 17th. And so, Brandon, we may have to move that up to next week so we can do that before the 16th, because I think we do need to talk about it. If there's a shared burden here, then that is much more sellable. But like I said earlier, if the superintendent makes $180,000 and a beginning teacher takes $400 or $500 a month pay cut, those two aren't really equal in terms of living in Sonoma County. And so I would like to see that addressed. If admin have more days on the calendar, if we each cut 5 days, that falls disproportionately on the teacher. And so those are the kinds of things that I would like to explore. I'm preparing teachers for the idea that there is going to be a shared sacrifice. There is no doubt that this is going to be. And whatever we decide now, obviously could change in the next couple of months. So I would like to do, what we can now with the idea that hopefully we'll get some more help from Sacramento and Washington in the next few weeks to fill some of these cuts.
Thank you, Pete.
I cannot answer the same way as Pete. I need to survey my membership. We do have a lot of stuff in place where we can get feedback from them and they can vote. But if you look at the furlough days and the disproportionality in the cost, it hurts us a lot more. So, and then in this particular section, every single one of these, except for the coaches and management furlough days, is a CSA position, except for the board health benefits. So we got a ways to go to figure out how we're going to help resolve this. And we have no meeting dates planned for negotiations. So I'm assuming once Jeremy comes in, unless Brandon wants to have something set up before that, but we need to get something on the calendar So that's all I've got right now.
Thank you, Brad.
Just for everybody's edification, what we've agreed to so far is just right about $2 million in cuts. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
A quick question for Lois. On number 36, the furlough days, we had talked about that earlier. That would have to be from the state saying we're going to reduce the calendar, right? Is that what we're talking about?
This one is just for management, so it would not have to come from the state.
But the certificated and classified would.
Yes, that is correct. And
Number 36 is assuming that we could do the furlough days for certificated and classified. Therefore, in good faith, management is also going to do the same amount of furlough days, right? Is that the assumption on number 36?
If we go for all furlough days, I think when we first put it on there, we also looked at it as just a possibility in and of itself.
Oh, okay, not contingent.
And can I clarify something Rich just said? Remember how we talk about increasing revenue and decreasing expenditures? I wouldn't say that the one-time things that you have instructed me to add to the budget are cuts. So it's not that we've done $2 million worth of cuts. We did some cuts, and then we've done some adding back of revenue.
I got you. I didn't maybe use the right word.
That's right. I just want to make sure that someone doesn't say they made $2 million worth in cuts last night, because we didn't. We added.
I guess so. If my thought, or if anybody's thoughts were that, hey, we were trying to reach a number of 3.21571, we're about $2 million of the way there so far.
That is correct.
Okay. Yeah. I apologize if I said the words, used the wrong words. I know that words mean things to people, so I didn't. So thank you for that clarification. Yeah.
So I wanted to comment because I don't feel like I have a strong, or even a sense from the unions of where we want to go in terms of furlough versus percent cuts versus this list, which is permanent. You know, these are positions, these are people's jobs. So I think we do need to go line by line, but we're going to have to do this. We're basically going to have to default to the layoff list unless we get some. I think for me, I'm feeling like I need a little bit more from people because we have to do something today. Does anyone else feel that way?
Well, and I do, and I think this list is fine, but if you look at scenario one, we almost need to have two screens up. In addition to the nearly 2 million, however we characterize it, that Rich mentioned, this second section of about 1.2, that scenario one had $835,000 of furlough days and $500,000 of summer certificated reductions. That's why I was asking. We sort of have all of them in there. And I don't know that that's necessarily the best MEDEX approach to use. I would like to frankly have perhaps less staff, but not cut their pay. I don't know if that's what the union leadership and the union members would like. They may want to say, we'll tighten our belt to a certain percentage or get some furlough days so everybody can keep their jobs. That would be helpful to know. Right now we have cutting positions, furlough days to cut pay, and to balance what Brad had said, 500,000 of prospective certificated cuts. So,
and I see Amy and Sharon's hands.
Yeah, and I want to stay on this slide, so it's perfect. Just a question. The cuts that you guys just approved, is that part of the first section one-time RRM, or is that part of the second section additional reductions?
No, that's the first section line.
First section. Yeah.
That's just the first section line?
Yes.
So somebody else had a question or something?
Amy?
Yeah, I wanted to, my comment was on the other list. And I think I agree with Stephanie. I'd like to hear some conversation line by line in terms of thinking what replaces a librarian at a high school level. in terms of working with students and resources and helping teachers with instructional technology. Our librarian is actually a media tech, so there's more to that position than at a high school level. And the other thing was the new line on there for an attendance position at the high school that we have 2 right now, and they are both busy all the time. If we're looking at trying to maintain ADA, cutting that position is cutting something that helps maintain revenue. And they're both busy. The one who deals with parents and students is busy nonstop with daily attendance, and reduction in that. The second position is someone who deals with the logistics of all the legal reporting, the record keeping, the short-term independent study contracts, the SARBs, all of those aspects. So I would like to hear some conversation about the rationale in those. Other things that have already passed on the list related to the high school are things like the CTE funding. I'm a good grant writer, so those are things that we'll attempt to make up in other ways, but I would like to hear the rationale on some of the positions.
Well, I'll start. This is the list that I find the hardest to agree to. There are lots of positions that are integral to the day-to-day workings of the school. These people are, for the most part, classified, as Brad mentioned earlier. I know that the sites rely on these people. The teachers received a lot of notes, including a couple tonight, showing the importance of our librarians and our computer techs and things like that. I think if we're able to avoid this list as much as possible, I don't know that I need to go down it one by one. I'd actually like to save all of these things. But again, that's going to come at the cost of something else potentially. I know we want to try to get to that 4.5 number, that $4.5 million hole that was mentioned earlier. But I think we can do that potentially with the 45-day revise, when we know if we need to do furloughs in the future, or we know that we need to do layoffs if they allow us to. But I would be hesitant to try to reopen the school. If we're able to reopen in August or September, I'd be very hesitant to open the school without these auxiliary staff members, especially, that help the school run on the day-to-day basis. And I'll stop there and let others comment.
I have 2 questions, but I think Trustee Adams wants to go.
You go, Stephanie. I'll go.
Okay. 2 questions. First, what is the number that we're trying to get to? Because I've heard 3. I thought I heard 3.2, and then I heard 4.5, and I want to make sure that I have it correct.
I believe 4.5 is the whole, but we have had a lot of conversation about not trying to get to that right away. So I think from my perspective, whatever we can do now, we do. And then we look at it over the next 6 months and make the changes as we need to. That our deadline is first interim, to have the 3rd year out at the right amount. So we have some time to have discussions and make plans and figure out more about what happens with revenue.
So thank you. My second question is, could we have kind of an interchangeable item here where we go back to the unions and say, like, here's the list that's on the table. These are all really important positions. I mean, none of these are things that I think we should be cutting at this time, especially with this level of uncertainty, but we have to put something in the budget to balance it out. And it could be something that gets taken away later, right? If we get supplemental funding from the state. It doesn't look like that's coming from the federal government. That's word from Senator McGuire. So could we have an interchangeable option is what I'm proposing to the rest of the trustees.
Go ahead,
Yes,
George.
Bill, then I'll go.
No, go ahead, George. I'll go after you.
Oh, I shouldn't have said anything. Basically, I agree with Eric. These cuts are never easy, and it's something that, unfortunately, we have to do. I agree that this second list is the difficult list. There's a lot of things here I don't agree with. I think that maybe we could kick the can down the road till July And also, like I think Stephanie mentioned, the unions seeing these cuts, they could talk to their membership, and they could also find out about the furlough days if that's something we can do, or reduction in pay. But just to cut tonight, just to cut to get to a $4 million number doesn't make sense. I think we made some reductions today, and if we could, leave it at that, maybe we could leave it at that, and then look at this again in July. We also have to look at Windsor Creek. Are we going to sell that, or are we going to rent that to the town? Look at some administrative cuts next year. These cuts are not going to be all solved tonight. This is going to be for the next couple of years. At least that's what my experience tells me from the last time we did this in 08, 09. So these are the difficult cuts on this page. And I would say if we could kick the can down the road for a couple of weeks, I say we do that. If not, if someone has a better idea, I'm willing to listen.
I don't have a better idea. I just have one, because we did talk about it, and in fact, you had raised it, and that's transportation. I was frankly stunned. I think it was last week when Lois shared that over 900 of our general education students are this number. Again, our special ed students were required to have some transportation infrastructure already. And I believe, George, and again, the number is 569,000 year one because of that 60-day notice, and 850 in the second year. As far as I understand, every single one of these positions are classified our bus driver and transportation team. But George had raised the issue of possibly sort of half implementing this in a slow, phased way. And I'd be curious to see if that has any traction. I think it has a huge impact. Where I look at it now, I sort of look to say, let's maybe do a placeholder for that in 2021, 2022, right? That's $850,000 or $560 that we've got to figure out. But I think with the uncertainty of what school looks like, adding on top of that to say, we may have buses, we may not, we'll let you know when we can get around to it. You saw what we got from our friends in the town to say, maybe we can get some transport or not. So I think that's one where that's the policy and program kind of cut. That's an equity, who rides the bus, how many kids in that family go on the bus. And I'm just not comfortable springing that in 75 days when school starts in August. But I do think if we need to, perhaps we put that into years 2 and 3, just as a thought. My final comment, sort of to Stephanie's comment, and I agree, not just cutting to reach a number, but asking our partners in the union to say, please tell us. And right now there was 835, I'm looking at scenario 1, 835,000 for furlough days. And that's on, I think, the second page of the sheet that we have, how that was calculated. The potential certificated reductions of 500,000 or some portion of a salary, across the board salary cut, to say from a staff standpoint of 1.3 to $2 million, how might the unions want to help us get there? In understanding that nobody wants to do that. And maybe we can have that feedback when we have our next budget workshop to have a sense of that. I would very much like to know, and I appreciate very much Brad needing to get together with his members and have a negotiating period put in the calendar, and Pete mentioning to move his up maybe. But I really want to know from our staff, which is the core of what gets our good teaching and support of our school sites done, what their suggestions toward this bad solution we have to reach is, with the understanding that that number is something, between $1.5 and $2 million. So that would be sort of my suggestion. I think we've made a little headway, but I'd really like feedback from our labor groups. And if they, can't, or they have differences of opinion, I'll appreciate and respect that. We'll hear the multiple views, and I think this board can make hard decisions if we need to. But I would prefer to have that interactive and collaborative partnership to the extent we can. And we still have a little bit of time to do that. So yes. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, another consideration kind of connect to what you're mentioning, Bill. And it's no fun to think about. It's people's livelihood. It's people's work jobs. And again, I'm being the pessimist. I can't avoid that sometimes. If we are not allowed to start school again based on what happens, and we don't come back in August or September and we wait until October, are we, and the union will definitely chime in on this. Are we paying our employees full-time for transportation when they're not driving the buses? I understand that food service needs to continue to work, and we need to mow the lawns, and we need to do online learning with our staff and our educators. Transportation isn't on the road if we're not coming to the school site. They do need to come in once in a while and maintain things and do service work and such. But that's a consideration also. I don't want to say we just, completely cut transportation. I don't want our students to not be able to get on site when we are able to come. But can we do a 50% furlough? Can we do a 20% reduction? I don't know. Maybe, again, it's going to be something that needs to be discussed through Brad and his union sponsorship. But things to consider. I don't know what everybody else is doing, but it's another thing out there. Those people aren't actively working as much. We've been paying them. That's great for their livelihood, but knowing into the future that we're not starting, I'm curious how the feelings would be there. Rich or Brad, whoever's ready. I couldn't tell whose hand was up there.
If Brad's got a comment, go ahead, Brad.
Okay, so I guess off the top of my head, what is our fair share? Because right now, if you did this second round of cuts after the first round, we're looking at our share is over $1 million, $1,025,000, if I did my math correctly. And we asked a question earlier that we haven't received an answer to about people being able to get unemployment. And that wasn't asked here. It was a different meeting. But if they're furloughed or not working and not getting paid, do they qualify for unemployment? I mean, some people have to make ends meet somehow. But again, I'm asking, what's our fair share? Because right now we're taking the brunt of it, especially if we do this second round in the next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Do we know the answer to that question that Brad had asked?
Well, there's two of them. One of the
not
workers'
the fair share. I'm sorry, the unemployment piece. I'm surprised we wouldn't know the answer to that.
I think I do, and I think the answer is yes. If you're furloughed, you're eligible for unemployment, and unemployment is actually more generous right now than it typically is. So that's another thing to.
Only until July, though.
Right. But it could potentially be extended. I mean, at least that's an area where there has been some, investment.
Yeah.
Education paid off, Stephanie.
For WDEA, when we had all the budget cuts for years and years, we didn't cut salaries. We laid off teachers. We cut around the classroom. So if I had to guess, most people, people vote in their own self-interest. So if you're not a beginning teacher, if you're not in the first year or two, you're going to vote to lay off teachers and keep your salary. I don't think we can have an answer to that question by next week. But we would be willing to deal with PKS layoffs in August or so, rather than make a rash decision, I think, right now. So, we understand that the board may have to take some drastic action in the future, but what I think we all really need is time and information. Right? We need to see what some, Sacramento and Washington might do. We need more information about this virus. We're trying to plan something without complete information. And so that's why the go slow approach seems to be better, because if year 3, we're still dealing with an unchecked virus and economic decline, all bets are off. I mean, seriously, we're in a situation where society doesn't even function at that point, right? You don't have an education system. You have, I don't know what you have, but I am optimistic, right? I am determined to make this work for Windsor Unified. We are trying to find opportunity in crisis here. And I appreciate the ideas toward working toward reducing our deficit. I have heard deficit spending for the last 20 years as WDA president. We have, school districts do that, right? And so that part, if we can correct some underlying problems. I have also heard, a request for revenue for many, many years. We talked about stadium naming rights, partnerships with wineries, 4 or 5 years ago? And none of that has really happened. And other school districts do that. And it's not a ton of money, it's not going to solve all of our problems, but we more than ever, we need to work together. It is perfectly obvious to me that there aren't winners and losers in this. We are one district. We're doing our best to try and educate the children of Windsor. And so let's just try and keep that in mind.
Thanks,
I
Pete.
think, yeah, thank you. I think that's actually the perfect segue to the next section of the meeting, which I think we just need to move
Gee,
to.
I haven't even got a chance to talk about.
Oh, sorry, Rich.
Oh no, it's all good. I was being patient. I'm trying to learn. I'm more like you, Bill. I'm trying to every day. Even my diet started yesterday. Hey, if everybody else is cutting, I'm going to try too. So I'm just going to throw this out there. It is so expensive to live here that with the biggest heart, a friend of mine used to say, I can't give somebody chicken pot pie if I don't have a chicken. And everybody's got payments they got to make, and everybody's got rents, mortgage, fuel, all those different things. I'm sure in their heart, they want to try and spread the pain out, but it's not sustainable. Everybody will slowly just take themselves down and a financial, make it even just worse. And that will totally wipe out our morale. So I'm leaning more towards, in this one particular area, me personally, leaning more towards trying really hard not to lower people's incomes as much as maybe lowering our staff. I'm just throwing that out there because of I hear from I have a ton of employees too. And we're all just barely, I don't care what level you live at, everybody's still living almost paycheck to paycheck. So if your paycheck now makes it to where you can't afford certain things, even with that. So just for me, I'm leaning more towards that. I don't know what that means with our partners in the unions, but I'm leaning more towards that, not reducing their salary to a level that nobody can make it on. And again, 2 or 3 of the people that just got hired in our school district are people I've been out cheerleading for. Man, come to our district. We're the best. And I know that might affect them. And again, we all 5 of us on the board, these are all our friends, neighbors, and partners. I would like to throw something on that list. We don't have it in front of us, and that's okay. But I'm just going to tell you guys right now, the sports stipends, that equals 13 students in our school district. I can guarantee you out of the 700 kids that play sports, we will lose way, way more than 13 if we don't have programs. I know a lot of coaches would be willing to volunteer and do different things. I'm just going to tell you there's a cost-benefit analysis that we will come up short. I also don't know why all stipends aren't on that list, but nonetheless, sports stipends, if you guys think that we're not going to lose 13 kids, and that covers that, I think we're missing it. I would like to see on that boat legal fees, because I know our district spends a chunk of it. We have 3 attorneys on our board. They work for, I think, about $200 a month as a school board member. That's a hell of a deal. That's not even about half of what the hourly billing rate is. And I know they all put in more than that. And Eric and I, we're not the educated attorneys, so we don't get to bill that kind of rate. But we both think that we're still worth that $200 anyway. So I don't. I asked a question. I don't know. I'm willing to bet you that our legal fees are pretty high, and that if we cut those $130,000 a year, let's just. I don't know. So I'd like to see that number get added onto that list. If we could look at that list, I want to make sure that I understand what each line means. So, for example, there were some different things in there that I think I know what they mean, but I want to make sure that everybody that's looking at it knows what that means. As our technology, as we go more and more technology, I think we have to have those resources there. I remember being a little kid, and there was always a librarian at every school. I mean, where else do the kids run to that are going to get beat up by somebody if you don't have a librarian? You got to have a librarian. They do everything. And so I don't know how we eliminate the librarian for all the reasons that everybody's mentioned, every reason, every field. So when we get to those lists and those lines, I'd kind of like if we could just have somebody go down and just say, hey, this is a line, this is what this means. So that way everybody's on the same page of what exactly we are thinking of taking out, if that makes sense.
So I'm gonna jump in here. I'm gonna ask Sharon to speak, and then I'd like the screen change so that we can see that list, and we'll go down one by one and check the boxes and see what we think.
Thank you.
I thought we had agreed to a different approach, Eric.
What approach would you rather do, Bill?
Well, not that I would rather do. I thought we had agreed that the third part of this was going to be some program and priority cuts and discussions.
Yes.
I don't want to close a meeting and not have that conversation again.
So I'll take responsibility for this. Rich had started kind of getting back to the list, and I texted Eric and said maybe we should just go line by line, and I figured we would add another 20 minutes on to the end to talk about policy, because I think we have to do it. We have to extend, because we're not going to not have the conversation. But Bill, if you think, I think we just have to agree how we want to do this.
Okay.
Just for clarification, I wasn't talking about voting on any particular line. I just wanted to make sure that we all understood what each line represented. So for example, like Bill, you talked about the general ed transportation. I think we understand that when we talk about the district office positions, just a little bit of a little more definition of what each one of those might mean. It might take 3 or 4 minutes. That was all.
So we have 10 minutes left on our scheduled agenda. It's just, do we want to spend our time? How do we want to spend our time?
I'd rather actually go to what Bill's comment was about, do that first. And then if we have time, go to these things, because I can get that offline.
Yeah, I suggested we would just talk about these cuts possibly on this page, going from computer assistance down to the board health benefits, that we talk about that in July. Not that we're not going to make those decisions, but we just we don't need to decide that tonight, and we could decide that after she turns in her budget. That's my recommendation. Then we could go on to those other pages, because there's a lot on those last 2 pages of this document.
Lisa, you have a comment, and then we'll move forward.
Yeah, it's been said, but I think it bears repeating that I hear and agree that this list has a lot of classified positions on it. Excuse me. And if you wait for the 45-day revise, like Pete said, not only will we have hopefully better information by then, but you can also then be able to weigh and balance what you believe to be the necessary cuts among the classified and certificated, and it not all fall to classified currently. So that's just something worth thinking about as well. Just wanted to say it again. I know it's been said, but I just wanted to say it again.
Thank you. Sharon, I neglected to come back to you. You've got your hand up big and strong. Share with us what you have.
That's okay. I had one question and 2 quick comments. The question's for Lois. Lois, I know back in the 2007-2008 cuts, has the state or federal government, I'm not sure which one or both, are we back at the funding level that we should be?
Well, the key word there is should, and definitely not. No. When we went back and got, let me get this right, fully funded with LCFF, it basically took us back to the 2007-2008 rates. So if you consider that adequate, then yes, we are. But technically they gave us back everything that was owed us, that they had deferred paying us. And whenever they gave a negative revenue limit cut, they put that in this pot and said, someday we'll pay you back. And Governor Brown did pay that all back, but there was no increases to really bring us up to our buying power of what it should be in this day and age.
Okay, and I just think that's an important point to make because we have been slashed before, and I feel like we're being slashed again. And, I'm really proud of our district, of our board, of our union presidents, because I feel like we're all collaborating and we're listening to one another. And I feel like we're all in this situation where we're being asked to make impossible decisions that are fundamentally fueled by a lack of proper funding. And I need to keep saying that because it's wrong to have to make the kinds of decisions we're having to make for the bulk of the students in our state. And I think more people need to speak up. So that's one thing that's the question and that's the comment. The other comment is, as teachers and educators, we've taken these cuts before. We've taken pay cuts. At least I did in my last district. I don't know what Windsor did, but no matter what we do, no matter if the unions or admin or everybody decides to take a pay cut or we lay off people, we're basically saying to our education employees, to all of them, whether they're classified or certificated, you will be doing more for less. End of story. And I just think it's really important to highlight that because no matter what, the teachers and the classified staff and the admin and the district office, we are all having to take a massive hit, and it will affect the children and it will affect their quality of education. And I think it's super, super important for people to speak up about that.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Those are valuable points, and until we get fully funded by the state, it's tough to make that be validated. So let's use the last little bit of time we have here. We will be extending a bit, but let's lead. You want to lead us through this list, Lois, or shall we just talk about them and see what everybody thinks?
So really quickly before we start, do we have a board consensus that we want to start? So I know this is like the policy section and the kind of the creative section. Is this where we want to start, or do we want to start with kind of other ideas? I know I've just from hearing other discussion, I just want to check because this could take up a lot of time.
This is just me. I don't care how long it takes. If it's 8 o'clock, most of us watch TV till 10 or whatever, 11, whatever. I'm willing to go for another hour or two, whatever it takes. I want to really get into the policies and the programs. So that way it kind of is going to help us to shape some of the other decisions we make. And we put that off now, I think once or twice meetings. I don't want to go any further in this without getting at least that part under our belt. So that way we can have more to think about.
Well, I would suggest that we go another 25 minutes. I'll make a motion till 8:25 and be firm, because even though we as board members could be here all night, it's not fair to our staff, our superintendent, Lois, and everyone else. So I would suggest we do what we can till 8:25 and then in the meeting and bring it up again when we, so that's my motion if there's a second.
Brandon, you had your hand up prior to doing second.
I just want to remind everyone that we do have a meeting established for June 9th as well. We do have some agenda items, but we can allot some time for this more programmatic discussion. Just reminding.
Okay, so we have a motion to extend till 8:25. I'll second the motion by Trustee Valenzuela. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay, 5-0. Before we get deep into this list, I know it's hard to not cut enough or to reduce enough to make us look good in that third year. But Lois, if we did those two first sections that came out to be approximately $2 million or so, would that, I guess, satiate the county to let them know we're trying? And then when we find out more about the budget in the future, we could obviously tweak it rather than deciding which of these other areas we really want to make the knife go to right now?
As I think I said before, but sometimes I'm not sure how my words come out, I will be using this whole list as part of my discussion with the board. Excuse me, with SCO. You'll see it in my budget report. We will talk about what we have done, and that's great that you've taken some action, because that actually looks very good to the county. And then it will show in our multi-year how much we still have to go, and they understand that we don't have all the information yet, that it will be completely fine. And as I've said, first interim is really our goal to get to the point. And while I'm talking, I think I would like to say that seeing that list really hurts me, and I'm the one who typed it. But I think my opinion, and you certainly don't have to listen to it, but is down below with the suggestions that have come from mybudgetquestions.com. There were some really interesting ideas. And I think it would be much more beneficial. One, before you talk detail about those classified positions, we were in a position to talk detail about certificated positions too. And we aren't in that position right now. That's going to be in a month or so that we can do that. And then also to incorporate anything from this bottom section that looks like a possibility. And I think there are some things there, so that it really is more of an even conversation about the district as a whole, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And the main reason I ask that is that no offense to Dr. Kruger, but we do have a new superintendent coming in 30 days from now. And I'm sure I know actually that he has a lot of budget experience in his previous district. And I'm sure he would like to go through this with us rather than having to jump on the coattails of what we did. I don't want to say to him, but without him. So if we can kind of, as was mentioned earlier, kick it down the road a little bit and show the SCO that we have tried to make some cuts already and that we have lots of potential cuts in the future. I think some extra workshops in July or August, when we do have our new leadership in place, might be an easier way for us to go. We may need to still make a lot of reductions or cuts, but having that leadership in place and working together some more with Mr. Decker may be a positive way to travel as well.
Eric, can I just get a clarification? My understanding was that for our budget that we had to send in, that we had to do a certain amount of reductions now, and unfortunately it seemed to fall more on the classified because of timing, and that we couldn't really do any kind of looky-loo at the certificated because of certain time date lines. But are you saying that actually both of those things can be looked at a point down the road, and it's not more heavily certificated now, classified now, but that both of those things is a window closing on one and not on the other, but is the window open for both, but not for just a little bit of time?
Well, in my opinion, and Lois can correct me, the window for certificated teaching staff is not yet open, and it may never be open. We don't know yet. The window for classified staff is open now and remains open if we ever choose to use it. It would be less of we have to wait 60 days. So if we made a chance to reduce certificate or classified, or kitchen staff or maintenance staff or paraeducators, all that union group, we would have to pay them for 60 days once we notice them. We could do that today. We could do that in August. We could do that never. Anytime that's open. But we're not allowed to do that with certificated teaching staff unless the state government allows
2%.
us to with a special variance.
Which I believe that everybody in the state's going to qualify for, correct? Well, or that's at least the understanding now.
It's qualified for, but it has to be approved and noticed. And it hasn't done that only once in the last 30 years or so. We hope that it would be a possibility, but it hasn't been done yet.
All right.
I'll make one teeny tiny correction, Eric. And
Please
that
do,
is
yeah.
that the 60 days has to be within an employee's work year. So truthfully, we will go for most of those positions, we would go all summer and not be able to notice them. We would not be able to notice them until the first day of their work year. So we really do have time to make this decision and look at things thoughtfully.
Thanks, Lois. Let's get going.
With that discussion kind of happening, we can still look at this list of my budget questions, because those are things that community members and staff have submitted. I think it's important to look at that, but we may not need to act on any of these tonight. It could be informational, it could be report driven, it could be all kinds of things. So would you like to lead us through the list, Lois, or?
I thought we were going to talk about program policies first, Eric.
Yeah, that's fine. We can do that. I just saw this page on the screen. I thought we were going here next. So whatever is most valuable to everybody.
I mean, I'd like to talk about some policies.
Let's talk.
All right. And I'd like to defer to my colleague, Trustee Adams, because he's brought this up and we've kind of not given it some time. So I'd like to hit at least the points that are the highest on his list, right, or his thoughts now, if he's open to that.
Yeah, I'll throw out three, just food for thought. Some of them made them onto this list, some of them didn't. I'll reiterate that 10% cut to the $7.7 million contribution that goes from our general fund to restricted. I would like to know what the impact of that potentially is if we do that. That's a question I have asked for some period of time and haven't gotten an answer. I think that's a place we can look. I noticed that North Bay Med is on here. Eric Heitz and I were two of the evangelists that argued and put a lot of sweat equity in getting that unique special program to our school. I very much hope that it would percolate back into the comprehensive high school. That might be a standalone school operation, and that philosophy of learning that we might want to look at. There's a number of closing it at 446,000, which seems very low to me. There's 17 staff that are out there, some of which would likely be needed for alternative ed. But I don't know. I think we need to talk about that. I'd be very interested to hear from staff at North Bay Med and also Amy and anybody at the high school. And finally, I think we need to look at those. I understand those numbers and the ratios aren't perfect, but it appears to me, and I know there's same number or more classrooms from classified, but it appears to me that our certificated teacher, and I would like to really get a little finer lens on it, has grown while our student numbers have dropped. And I need to get a much better sense, because it appears if we're going to right size, I absolutely agree with Trustee Carnation. I would like to have more people being paid, keeping their benefits, being able to give raises, and not more, but have perhaps a smaller staff, and understanding that means we do less with less in some way than across the board percentage cuts or furloughs. I would, and that may not be what our employees want. I don't know. That's what I would like to do as one of the, manager leaders of this organization with 500 employees. So those are sort of my 3 points, Rich, and I'll be quiet.
I agree with all. On the North Bay Met, I was so impressed with what they did for our students. I do believe, and I did ask a question, and I think that it is possible to take what they're doing and roll that in, and I'm just going to use a generic term, as somewhat of a core type thing at the high school and also at the middle school level. So duplicate what they're doing. It might be just a little bit of a different thing. I'm just going to throw this out there. And I don't even know if I start to get into territory that I'm not supposed to, any one of you guys unmute and just say, stop. But we've made certain hires for certain positions at certain places. And if all of a sudden we decided to say, hey, we're going to, North Bay Met might be eliminated entirely, that in my mind is going to give our district such a black eye for one purpose. People are applying for jobs at our school that are coming from other places. And if we advertise and then before they even get here, they go, oh, my program got cut and a person got left out in the cold. Now, I understand that there's other people that just got hired as teachers too, and that may happen. I want to try and figure out how we don't eliminate something before the people that we just hired to do it even get here, because they just left and let other people know where they're at, that now, hey, I'm going to be gone. They're making changes where the other people used to work. Now they're coming here, and then all of a sudden, oh, they don't have it here anymore. We will struggle with having a reputation that maybe you may not want to take that job at Windsor. They will cut you before you even get there. So I think we need to be very careful about that and factor that in, that it might hurt our reputation long term by doing some of those things. The legal fees, like I said, that's one of my special ones that I'd like to see get eliminated a lot. And we can go for more, but I want to allow time for other people to speak their thoughts.
I'm curious, and we never really have talked about this, but Cowie's a charter, they pay their fair share, and that allows them to make their own budgets and such. Maybe the possibility in the future is to consider having North Bay Met be a charter as well, where they need to get enough enrollment to be able to fund their staff and make their own budget. It's not something we can decide now, obviously. It's not something that we're ready to talk about much tonight, but I'd like to put that on a parking lot list to consider that somewhere down the line potentially.
Eric, on that point, I'm sorry, but you just triggered something in my mind, and that is going more towards also revenue generation. And that is, I don't know if we have to take, and I don't know the logistics of any of it. Do we need to convert Windsor High School or all of our Windsor schools to charter schools for this purpose? And that is, and somebody can help me out, but if a kid misses a day of school, we lose that ADA. Our kids have to miss so many days before then they're allowed to make up some of that. I understand that charter schools don't have that same restriction, or the restriction isn't quite as much. And so whatever we can do via online learning, extra, making up homework, those kind of things. We're doing online learning now, or distance learning now with our students. If we can incorporate some sort of online learning ADA recapture system, I think that we should look at that a lot. I know.
Yeah, I think the point you're talking about is the independent study piece. Traditional school, you can't do independent study till after missing 5 days. The charter schools, you're allowed to do it on the first day. So you can take that, but you still have to do the work. You still have to be accounted for. It's a very small variance. It could make a little bit of difference, but I think that's the point you're trying to reference.
Yeah, but if we have, so thank you for that clarification. But again, if we have kids, if we're at 95% occupancy, not occupancy, I'm sorry. I was looking at some performance today for a project. If we're at 95% attendance, and if we can get that up to 98 or 99% attendance, simply by doing two things, and they're both positive. One, giving our kids opportunities to do homework and learn the things that they missed in that particular class. That I believe we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in just that 2 or 3% addition. And the wonderful benefit is our kids learn even more than they otherwise would have. So there's a benefit all the way around. If we have to become a charter, man, then let's become a charter so we can have that option. And whatever those hurdles are, maybe those hurdles are worth going over, and maybe they're not. Anyhow, that was you triggered that.
So
one quick point, just for the clarification of the board. North Bay Med Academy is an independent study school. That's part of its mission as a school of choice.
Thanks, Lisa. I wanted to hear from Trustee Valenzuela because he's been on the board for so long. I'm really interested in his perspective. And then if we have any student board members here, I actually would rather hear from others than speak myself. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Well, really quickly, I think the North Bay Met is interesting. However, we need to work with the high school because if the board's idea is to fold that into Windsor High, that's more work and you're gonna have to create a core. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but I don't think it's something that we could mandate from where we are. I think that should be a discussion for next school year with the principal and I guess there's a new principal at North Bay Med as well. Maybe that could be a discussion and then we could get a report back in December as to what, if we did close that school, what we could do, because just closing the school just to close the school doesn't make sense. Where are those students gonna go? And also I would like to see for next year discussions about the sale of Windsor Creek. I think it would take a year. So those would be two discussions that we're not gonna get to tonight. And then also the Windsor High School AP, we used to have 3, we have 4, we should have that discussion. And then the Cali now has a new AP, but based on this form, it says it's no relief to the general fund, so I'm not sure. But, you know, nothing's easy, and this is just the life we're gonna lead as board members. We had a few good years of no cuts, and we're back to the cuts, so that's just the nature of the beast. And I don't have any quick fixes, but I think that we should have like long-term goals and short-term goals and discussions, but we can't just make cuts blindly, and the more information we have, the better.
So George, if I could kind of recap a little bit, I'm going to make a parking lot so we have a reference to know. You talked about North Bay Met potentially changing, the administration at the high school and at Cali, and what was the third thing?
Windsor Creek, if we were to sell that,
yes,
that would be something we'd have to start in July, August. You know, you can't just sell a school that quickly. I don't think it happens that fast, or I could be mistaken. But if we do decide as a board that we're going to sell that property, it's going to take a while to go through all that. And then once you sell it, then that money might help in 21, 22, but that's not going to help us for next year. That's going to help us for 2 years out. And as Lois mentioned, it's one-time money. So yeah, I think you got to think big picture, and you know, what we can do, what we can't do. And on some of these cuts, if we have time to talk to administrators or our leadership, I think it's good. And also on the sports and the transportation, I think we should, if it does come to that, we should also put those phased in over 2 years. That way we give the public notice, because you can't just cut transportation without giving any notice. If it's 2-phased, I think it's going to be easier, and also with sports. But I do agree with Rich's comments with the sports, that that's like a sacred cow. If you cut sports, you lose students, and that's just the way it is in high school. So those are my thoughts, but nothing on this list is easy. I don't think you can cut legal expenses. They're pretty cheap already. And special ed services, that's driven by their IEPs. It drives every school board and superintendent crazy, but those are costs that you have to incur. So if we're the local educational agency for a special ed student, we can't pawn off that student to another district because we still have to pay for those costs. Anyway, I'll stop there.
One policy thing that I had, Eric, real quick, is if we're having to make adjustments, like I'm looking at number 59, reduce music at Brooks to 0.63 to match PE. I don't know how you get like 0.63 of a person, 0.24 of a person, those kind of things. My thought is this, is if we need to reduce things, I would rather reduce as a policy, if a person has a full-time job, that we would reduce the part-time jobs first before the full-time jobs. And this just for discussion, I think it's going to be easier for someone to replace a part-time job than it is going to be to replace a full-time job. And so that was my thought, is that it's going to be easier to replace easier to replace a part-time job versus a full-time job. So I don't know what you guys are thinking about that, as far as if that's a policy, that's something we have to change, something that's not even in place. It was just something that I was thinking about when I was looking at these different points of employment, that I think that we should try to keep the full-time jobs in place as much as we can before we start going that route.
So I had wanted to hear from a student board member. I think we had two, but now I think we have Ava. So I would just love to hear if you have ideas about policy or any of the items on this list, or different ideas that we haven't talked about.
Thanks. I have been listening and trying to kind of digest everything I'm hearing, trying to read on the side and find out, actually learn what this is all about and the logistics behind everything, so that I kind of have a deeper sense of what's going on. Something that I have heard a lot is what is going to affect students. I've heard that just used a lot when talking about certain cuts. And I would like to mention that salary cuts for teachers, pay cuts, those do also affect students, not necessarily in the sense you'd expect, but because we are receptive to how our teachers are feeling and to their well-being, and we have relationships with our teachers, and it definitely does change the experience when you're worried about how your teacher is doing outside of school when you're in a classroom. Of course, there is a lot more to that, but I just wanted to point out that pay for the district staff does affect the students a lot more than I expected going into school. I didn't think that what my teachers were being paid would affect me as much as it does. And also, I'm also going through the Facebook comments here, and I am seeing a lot of conversation about the North Bay Met Academy, which I was actually enrolled in for a semester, and I just wanted to, I know it's been said a lot, but it is an amazing program that's really helpful to people who can't be in a classroom at the time for medical reasons, or just because they don't function well in a regular classroom or in the core setup. So North Bay Met's doing great. I just wanted to add that in there.
Thank you. I don't think Anna is here, but I know she's back. I know you really wanted to be here. You're named as Amelia, but I know who you are. So if you could unmute and give your comments on policy and what just overall thoughts, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I've actually been kicked in and out of the meeting probably like 7 or 8 times. So at this point, I don't have enough information to give like comments on it because I kind of missed the last like 30 minutes of the meeting. So I would like to watch it on Facebook and then maybe give a comment at a later date or a later time, if that's okay. I'm sorry. It's my Wi-Fi's been all over the place.
That's fine. Thank you.
Hey, Eric, could Lois clarify one thing? I believe it was Lois that said that is North Bay Met, it was Lisa. Lisa, is North Bay Met, they are a charter, or you said they're an independent charter, or?
They're a school of choice, and they are an independent studies school.
Okay, so they're not a charter then?
They are not a charter.
So the independent study is the issue I mentioned before, where they can only miss they're only allowed to miss 1 or 2 days before they could get makeup work done, and we get credit for that.
But in the North Bay Met model, the attendance is taken differently because they're an independent studies school, so that's a little different.
Gotcha. I wonder if they would be interested. Well, we're probably gonna have to let the new principal, maybe we get Susan to give us her thoughts as well on the way out, but with the new principal in there, after he gets his feet wet for a while, maybe turning that into a charter so that way we can get more, build that program up even more. It's an incredibly good program. I'm so impressed with it for so many kids that I just think it's one of those, that might be one of those early Cali type diamond in the rough type programs that I think that we need to really need to try and keep our eye on it, figure out how to help feed it.
Yeah, I'm looking for our new leadership to try to grow that as much as possible. We have done some outreach already. They've advertised out in the rest of the county, and we already have quite a few interdistrict transfers into that program. It's not the time or the place, but Lisa could speak to that another day. But it could be revenue generated by ADA and things like that. So it's a good thing. We've liked that program for a long time. Any other comments from anybody that's on the Zoom? I can only see a few of you. You could go into the chat if you'd like to, or just speak up. We can't hear all of you or see all of you when the screen's being shared like this. So
I have one actually. It came from a conversation that I had with someone else on the board, and I thought it was a really interesting idea. I know that, and it relates to Callie, so I don't know if Sharon is still on the call, but I know that we decided to kind of structurally cut one class out per year because the campus was getting so crowded, it was kind of getting so unmanageable. But that's where we have demand. And I think I think something feels off about doing that. And I know size-wise it makes sense, managerially it makes sense, but I know we do have a new assistant principal coming in, so there will be 3. We don't even know what the school year is going to look like if all of our students will be on campus at the same time. So I'm wondering if there is a way to potentially build that class back in. From my understanding, there are enough students on the waiting list right now. At least I've been, and I could be incorrect about that, but that was one of the creative approaches to kind of refocusing on things that generate revenue and consolidating things that are maybe shrinking a little bit to try to really bolster them. So
I second that motion.
Let me speak to that.
yeah, Sharon and Lois are both ready to speak. So
I think it seems more simple than it is. So we did cut back one class of kinder after meeting with every single stakeholder group, and it was supported almost unanimously across the board. One of the biggest issues for Callie is space and safety. So we're at the point right now when we have recess that we have to rotate grade levels who are allowed to play on the structure because there's too many kids and it's not safe. So we have to have like half of them, they can go on the structure and half of them can go on the blacktop or the field. We have 5 different lunch periods. We have to have traffic patterns drawn out for every scenario during the day for, beginning of the day, break time, lunchtime, after school. Our buildings are deteriorating. We don't have enough office space. So I would be happy, and I think most people would be happy to expand Callie if there was space to do so. Yes, there are 75 kids on the waiting list because we dropped back. Last year, so that there would have been 51. However, of the students that are on the waiting list, if we would have accepted those 24 kids for the additional class, we would not be able to maintain the language balance that we need for our program to work. So if we were to try and expand Callie, we would have to change our program fundamentally, which I'm not saying is off the table. It is a possibility. But if we want to maintain a 90-10 two-way bilingual immersion model, we would not be able to with the students that we had registered because we have a disproportionately large number of students who are English speaking as opposed to Spanish speaking or bilingual. So that's the fact. And our campus was not built to house that many kids. It's also a challenge to find bilingual teachers. It's a challenge. And it's a challenge to retain them when we can't pay them what they're worth. So it's more than just the size.
I'm going to throw something out there, and I'll get to Lois in 1 second. Sorry, I'd forgotten you had your hand up earlier. We are past our time. I want to honor that, but I'm going to put on the parking lot the potential to have a discussion months later, not today, of potentially expanding Cali with an annex at Mattie Washburn. I went to elementary school in Hillsburg. The school wasn't large enough. We used the annex that was actually the military unit for the National Guard up on the mountain, and that program worked. This is, again, a discussion for much later, but we may be able to do some extra things with the facilities we have at other places. Lois, you had a comment?
I just want to make it clear that if it's a chosen thing that Cali is a wonderful program. If you want to expand Cali for Cali's sake, that's great. And Sharon talks a lot about the pieces of that, but expanding Cali does not help the district. Prior to the problems that Windsor had 5-6 years ago, the way things were accounted for was Cali was rolled into the general fund budget. It was not a separate accounting like you see it now in Fund 9. And Cali was supporting the district. The district was continuing to spend more than it brought in, but it was living on Cali's good performance and its fund balance. So one of the first things FCMAT did when they came in is divest Cali to its own fund. Cali stands alone. They have their own income. They spend their own things. Yes, they're under your oversight as a board. They are under our union, so that all gets interspersed, but they truly are a separate school. And if they flourish and expand, that's great, but it doesn't help Windsor. So I just want to make that clear. It's not a revenue generating thing to help the district. It's revenue generating to help Cali.
Before we leave Cali, Lois, do you expect that Cali is going to get information at some time that they'll see about a 10% of that $10 million a year LCFF?
Oh, definitely. And Sharon and I have already talked about it, and their reserves are high enough and the amount is small enough that and especially if we put in some reductions that they need to abide by, they'll more than be fine.
Eric, just really quickly, my last point on Cali. My concern, and Lois, I appreciate that information. So maybe if our whole school district went charter, then Cali would fall back in underneath all of our budgets and what have you. But I'm just a simple business guy. If where we have demand, you should fill the demand. If people want a certain type of product, then we should be able to provide that product. That is where a lot of our interest seems to go. Here's my concern. And so I'm willing to spend all this coming year to ferret out all these different issues that Sharon brought up and everybody else might have. But if we cut our kindergarten now, the long-term effects of that are about a 240 student reduction in Cali over the next 8 years that you never get back. You can't get that back. So we may 5-6 years from now going, wow, that's a wonderful thing. Too bad we limited our class back then. It's stopping us from having certain abilities. So my thought is, and just everybody can noodle on this, let's not cut that class this year. Knowing what Lois just mentioned, knowing what Sharon's mentioned, let's gut it out for one more year with the understanding.
We have nowhere to put them. We have no.
That could be one of those things that Eric just mentioned about the parking lot type of thing that we can, maybe we need to, as soon as we get this budget done, maybe we need to speed up some discussions about how we could make that work. We're never going to get those 240 students back if we keep that now. Let us try and figure it out. Give ourselves 1 year, not even a whole year. We can figure it out fairly quick. There's a lot of smart people in our district that can figure out a way to make that work. I just hate turning away people who want things that we can provide, that I believe is a way, that there's a way to capture that revenue as well. And I'll leave it at that. That I'd rather, if we can just muster through it one more time, then that would be my thought.
I have to just say one more thing, because I don't want to be left in a light where it looks like we made a harsh and rash decision. This is something we discussed with all of our stakeholders. And I repeat, if we were to take another class of 24 students, we would not have the language balance, not even close, not even remotely close, to be able to uphold our program.
Thank you.
Okay, that's another discussion to
one
go
quick
another day.
comment. Sorry, I have one quick comment about Callie. I just have a really hard time when it's a school in Windsor and hearing that it's not, growing Callie, or that it's not helping Windsor. And I know that it makes sense on the books, but I have to give a little context growing up, and I'll be really brief. When Callie was a part of the district, it was a public school. The reason why it's a charter school now is because of Prop 227, which made it basically unlawful for it to be a public school. And that's when it became a charter. So I think that the history there of how it became a charter and kind of the background, I don't know, it was part of the school system. It was just another program. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I think looking back on that history, it's too bad that that's how it looks in the books. And that's it. It just feels weird. But I will try to learn more about how to, be more productive in light of the actual budget.
And also, being a charter school, we can take students from outside of the district. So that's where a lot of the revenue that we have, I think, comes from, or extra, I should say, comes from, because we're not declining enrollment, because we can pull from outside of the district. So it's a big thing to take into account.
Okay, so we have gone over our extended time. George had asked us to stop at 8:25. We're quite a bit past that now. I think Lois has some guidelines she can follow to work toward the budget. Do we want to use some time on June 9th, a week from today? There are a couple other items we want to get caught up on. But I think we need, in my opinion, we need to kind of wait and see what the budget's going to look like from the governor, what the unions have had a chance to talk about in 30 or 60 days from now, and then make our adjustments into the future. But I'd like to hear if anybody else has a closing comment before we do that.
I would very much like to carve out at least a half an hour. There are very few things, it seems to me, that are important as this right now. At a minimum, Lois, if you could do a multi-year projection based on the decisions we made today and show us what that looks like, I think that would be helpful.
I will respectfully decline. I am on such a tight timeline to get you something by the 16th. I can have you a multi-year on the 16th, but I can't do anything extra between now and then. I'm barely making it.
I have real reservations about how I'll vote on a proposal that I see for the first time on the 16th. Then I'll just say that. So that's my 2 cents, Eric. You asked. That's my thought.
I just wanted to add, Eric, that the Cali discussion should come up again sometime, maybe not now, but we also talked about a 2-story building there to make it, aesthetically pleasing. There's also a discussion about moving portables differently. And there's also the portable discussion at Windsor Creek. I'm sorry, Maddie Washburn. So I'd like for that to come back to the board at some point. What are we doing at Cali? Are we just rearranging, putting some new portables there? Or are we going with the 2-story? I know we had that discussion a while back. All these things are interrelated. And we'll do what we can on June 9th.
Any closing comments from Dr. Kruger before we get ready to sign off?
No, I will be working with you, Eric, just to make sure we have a clear agenda guidelines for the 9th.
And I would like to remind the trustees, as well as the public, that we do have this site that we've been looking at tonight. mybudgetquestions@WUSD.com that they can send suggestions and information to. We may be too late to include all of them right now, but we will look into those things in the future. And trustees, if you have questions and comments or things you'd like to get to Dr. Kruger and myself, please send those along, and we can see how much time we have and if staff can get to them in the next week or two before we can send our initial budget to SCO office, and then we'll do more in the future. So at this time, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'll move.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Ahmad. Second motion?
I want to stay.
I'll make the motion to adjourn, the second motion. All those in favor of adjournment of the June 2nd budget workshop number 3, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Rich is going to say aye after all. Okay. Okay, we're passing 5-0. We will spend a little bit of time on June 9th with this topic. And then we have a traditional regularly scheduled meeting on June 16th for a traditional board meeting, not just a workshop. So we'll go over other items on that date. And then again on June 30th, and the budget will be a hot item that night as well for approval. So thank you all for attending.
Right. And Brandon, let's talk about moving negotiations to next week before the
yes.
Yeah.
I'll be in contact with you. And
okay.
I don't know if Brad is here anymore, but yes, we'll be in touch tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Again, thank you all for attending. If you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube stream, we appreciate your comments. We'll look back at those in the future, and we will see you in a week or two. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night, Chris.
Can you guys stay for a second? I have a non-board related issue. The question is, should we do anything to recognize graduation like the administrators at Windsor High School and what a good job they did?
I was going to ask to put that on celebrating success for our June 16th meeting.
Okay, perfect. I didn't know if we wanted to do like flowers or something too, or something.
Well, if we were able to be in chambers, that'd be nice if they could show up. Maybe I could ask if a couple of us could be there, and we could broadcast from there, like we did for the town meeting, and then we could ask whoever, Amy and both Amy's to come, since they had the biggest role in that, and the VPs as well.
Mm-hmm. Or even like how Jen dropped off flowers with Anna Whiteley. Maybe we could do something like that. I just think it would be nice. I would even chip in if I don't know how our budget is, but
that might be something we want to chip in for. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it was my expectations were crazily exceeded of what I thought how things would go. I mean, I'm not very creative, so I didn't have an expectation, but every part of the whole experience was way better than what I thought it would be. Ran smoother than I thought it would be. And the kids really dug it. The parade part going, every aspect of it. I mean, I asked Kaylee how she thought, and she goes, Dad, this was kind of cool. She goes, it was like a parade, and we were like the parade person, and I heard from so many parents, and you guys probably did too. Like,
yeah,
this is the way we should do it from now on.
Oh my gosh, every school that I went to, like, right, Eric?
They all said that.
Every school, they were like, this is what we're doing every year. But so I think celebrating success sounds great. Do you want me to circulate an email asking anyone if they want to do something more, or should we just leave it at that?
If you would, that would be great. If you wouldn't mind initiating that,
Okay.
Maybe ask Brandon who to include in that. If it's all the VPs and Amy Whiteley, or if there were others that really stepped up. I don't know everybody that did everything. We can't do 100 people, obviously, but
yeah. And Jen might have a sense too.
Yeah.
Jen was pretty involved. So
Jen would be a big advocate there. And then I
You
thought
know-
for June 30th, we'd do something similar for Brandon, where he could, be recognized. It's his last day on the job and we have a board meeting that night. So,
okay.
Just to throw it out there for you guys, Jen Cox is like one of our little unsung heroes. She has been like the mama for our whole damn district. And I mean, she's stellar. And I think it'd be great if we could kind of give her some sort of recognition or some sort of something too. I don't know how you do that, but I mean, with all the different changes and meetings and this and that and the rest, she's just knocking it out of the park. And so anyhow, just throw that out there
hoping
too.
that she and Jeremy are a good fit together. I don't want that damaged at all. So I hope that works out well. Okay, we should get off of here, but
All right.
Steph, if you don't mind sending out an email to find out about who to honor, and then I can tell Brandon we want to put that on the agenda, and we'll try to set something up. Maybe we can be in person, a couple of us. And
Good night,
invite
you guys.
Chambers.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Perfect.
Okay. Good night, guys.
Bye.